Our world is long since shattered, but hope still flickers in our darkest dreams. Few would guess that our fate would be decided upon the Oneric Isles, an almost forgotten archipelago of the southern sky realms. On these uncanny islands, the apostatic union, power-drunk after slaughtering their once exalted gods, maintains but a paltry presence. Under their negligent gaze, the deep forests and dark places teem with cutthroats, cultists, and worse. In the desolate, endless realm, poor souls languish undying in decrepit mausoleums, yearning for their lost mortality, while the Clockwork Kingdom, ruled by the crooked logic of its manufactured monarch, strives to transform not just the realm, but reality itself. All these regions have their part to play in this unfolding story, but it begins fathoms below in the Underlands, a ruinous wasteland where none can draw breath for long. It is here that a secret waits to be uncovered by someone whose dreams burn brighter than any. But will those dreams kindle into a radiant destiny, or will we burn in the folly of delusion?
This is Dread Delusion. Man, what an incredibly underrated RPG. I initially dove into this game with no context or expectations of what I was getting myself into, but found myself yearning for the climax of a story so grand and masterfully written, I wished it would never end. Dread Delusion initially popped up on my radar when I was browsing through Steam looking for interesting games to play before I even began this channel. I didn't really know much about it, but seeing the bizarre visuals of the game, I was immediately interested. Dread Delusion has a distinct aesthetic with its bright pink skies and low-poly creatures and characters, standing amidst open landscapes with a variety of interesting architecture behind them. A common observation I've heard is that it looks like a new indie Morrowind clone. And although there are many similarities between Dread Delusion and the Elder Scrolls games, I think summarizing it as a clone is doing the game a great disservice. Having played the game from start to finish, I can absolutely say with confidence that this game deserves respect and acknowledgement for what it manages to achieve all on its own. The game initially launched as an early access title on Steam, and went through many updates between 2022 and May 14th, 2024 when the game finally had its full release. Since then, 2 major updates have come out, including what the developers have stated as their final update for the game. And this is what I had been waiting on to make this video, and I'm happy to finally get to cover the fully released version with you. Dread Delusion was developed by Lovely Hellplace with the backing of Dread XP, their publisher. Lovely Hellplace is run by a solo developer known as James Ragg, whose previous work is only a few small itch.io games, such as Shatter in Dread XP's Dread X collection and The Night is Darkening. So what the game manages to accomplish with its incredible writing, distinct visual style, surreal and memorable sound design, and complex and thought-provoking moral and psychological themes deserves a thorough and detailed examination. We'll explore how all of these elements come together to create one of the most thematically rich indie RPGs I've ever experienced. But first, thank you to all my patrons for their continued support making these videos possible, and all the comments and subscribers who kindly encouraged me to continue on. I couldn't do it without you. So, let's start by discussing the game's aesthetic and art style, which is definitely the first thing that drew me to the game. Dread Delusion utilizes the classic low-poly style that I've talked about before, and has become very popular in recent years. And with that, there's a few default graphic settings that enhance that classic low-poly RPG feeling. These are a low-resolution filter that makes the game have a more blurred effect like you might see from old CRTs, and wobbly textures and models, reminiscent of the old PlayStation 1 technology. In my playthrough of the game, I actually preferred these to be turned off for a more clean appearance, as I found them a little distracting and hard to look at, especially in large open environments. And speaking of environments, the first thing you notice when you enter the world of Dread Delusion is the game's bizarre setting. When you first walk outside into the open world of the Oneric Isles, you're hit with a wave of sensory information that takes a moment to really take it. The most striking feature is the sky, a glowing canvas of pinks and reds textured like neural pathways, broken up by rolling clouds, a sea of floating islands, and long twisting strands of color spiraling towards the Noron star that radiates light across the isles. Dread Delusion is equal parts breathtaking and disorienting. When you take in the landscape for the first time, you're hit with the intense clash of color between the vivid sky against the contrasting, earthy tones of the world below. You're forced to absorb it all at once. The large stone textures of the island's undersides, the jagged cliffs and fields of grass adorned with bizarre and alluring structures, and most notably, the forests of giant bioluminescent mushrooms that fill the sky realms. All these features of the Oneric Isles, with their glowing greenish-blue fungi, rocky surfaces, and metallic structures, flood your vision as the complex, radiant sky fills the empty space all around with a harshly contrasting color palette. This all serves to create a visual experience that is as overwhelming as it is dreamlike and surreal, and I can understand how the game's appearance might not be for everyone at first, and it can feel kind of hard to parse what you're seeing at times. But as we explore the game's rich narrative and thematic layers, I think you'll come to see how all the game's otherworldly and intense visuals work beautifully in the grand themes of what Dread Delusion presents to us. As you progress through the Sky Realms, each new location is visually striking and distinct, each evoking their own unique mood and themes, adding depth and diversity to the game's world while also maintaining its core identity. But that identity isn't shaped by visuals alone. The full depth of emotion you experience on your journey is shaped just as much by the distinct and memorable sound design as it is by its striking visuals. From the moment you first step foot in the Oneric Isles, you're enveloped by the steady, droning wind that rushes across the surface of the Sky Realms, a constant reminder of this world's vast expanse, bound only by the very lands we journey upon. That quiet rush of ambience is broken by the game's subdued music, the sharp clashes and screams of battle, the ominous shifting of ancient mechanisms far beyond our comprehension, the eerie, alien chirping that resonates through the mushroom forests. All of these serve to bathe you in a swirling blend of mystery, wonder, and a deep, unshakable sense of dread. The themes of Dread Delusion permeate every aspect of the game and its sound design, down to the most basic sound effects. From the deliberate slow creaking of doors that give age to the world, to the fantastical sounds of casting spells that feel both wondrous and arcane, to the ominous bell accompanied by ethereal voices as you level up, marking your progress into Delusion with eerie solemnity, and the crystalline mechanical sounds of the save points, which are way too loud by the way, are equal parts inviting and otherworldly, offering a brief and fleeting sense of refuge, but never letting us forget the dreadful delusion we find ourselves rushing towards. But what exactly is this dreadful delusion hinted at by the game's title? To answer that, and to unpack the deeper themes woven throughout the game's sprawling world and narrative, we need to understand where our journey takes us, and what's truly at stake. We begin our journey like all great journeys, in a jail cell. Okay, look, I know I said this isn't an Elder Scrolls clone, but I never said it wasn't heavily inspired by the Elder Scrolls games, alright? Anyway, before we can actually look around, we're told,
The world was long ago broken, its surface cursed. You are a dweller of the Sky Realms, drifting islands that cradle the last of human civilization. Here, in the dank cell of an Inquisition ship, you ruminate on your past.
and we're thrown into a character creation screen. This portion contains a set of options to choose that establishes a loose character backstory that doesn't really play much of a role in your journey. But more importantly, this is where you choose your starting stats. None of the stats here should be unfamiliar from what you would see in similar RPGs. Might increases your max health and affects your attack and defense. Guile increases your max stamina and affects your lockpick and agility skills. Wisdom increases your max mana and affects your lore and spellcasting skills. And Persona increases your health regen rate and affects your charm and barter skills. In the next screen, you can choose the next portion of your background, which applies a flat bonus of plus 20 to any of the following skills: attack, lockpick, lore, or charm. And the final option, let's just choose another plus 20 flat bonus to defense, agility, spellcast, or barter. For my playthrough, I chose all the bonuses related to the assassin type skills. So I chose Guile, Lockpick, and Agility. I personally recommend these skills or the skills related to Persona, but any option is fine as you can level all of them throughout your playthrough. And as we go along, this game will teach us what the different skills do, so we'll come back to these later. With our character created, the game quickly thrusts us into a confrontation with a strange cast of characters, raising more questions than they answer. As we exit our cell, we meet a strange biomechanical construct functioning with cipher magic that speaks of redemption and sin. as well as a grotesque, spiked iron coffin oozing blood, performing various tasks with its spindly mechanical arms and legs. The voice from within is the High Confessor, an agent of the Apostatic Union, a faction we'll come to understand more as our journey continues. As a prisoner of the Apostatic Union, she demands that we serve our sentence by performing the task she's laid out for us. The Confessor explains that the Union has recently arrived in this land, an archipelago of floating islands just on the fringes of their influence, the Oneric Isles. They've come here seeking the leader of the Dark Star mercenaries, Vela, an infamous, powerful warrior and daughter of the famous Admiral Kalos of the Apostatic Union. We're told that she was groomed for command, but fled to form her own band of cutthroats separate from the life she was born into. The High Confessor tells us the Dark Star mercenaries were tolerated by the Union for a time, until Vela began to have delusions of grandeur, and has even come to believe that she can create some sort of heaven. Now that is a hell of a claim. To understand more, we're sent off to the Blinding Light Fortress, a massive stronghold off in the distance with a great cannon at its top. We're told the Dark Star mercenaries have made the fortress their home, and we need to head there to meet Inquisitor Ignavius, who can help us enter and confront Vela Kalos. As we step out of the Inquisition ship and explore the immediate area, we find this ghostly woman floating before us. She doesn't really say anything particularly enlightening, but states that something big is brewing in this world and to be careful. I would have appreciated a bit more detail, but I guess it's pretty standard for ghosts to be cryptic and obtuse. From here, we enter the tutorial section that teaches us all the basic mechanics of the game. Heading down the path, we come to the strange floating blue skull. This is a Glimmer of Delusion. Dread Delusion doesn't have a standard leveling system like most RPGs of its kind. Instead, you collect these to increase your stats. Glimmers of Delusion can be found in two forms. You can find them hidden around the world for you to uncover and collect, and they're given as a reward for each quest you complete. As you collect more of these glimmers, the delusion bar in your stats menu fills up. Once the bar is full, you gain a point to spend to increase one of your base stats, therefore improving your skills. To the left of this Glimmer of Delusion, we find a cave with this eldritch alien totem made up of dark bodies with arms extended upwards to the image of an amalgam of floating skulls spinning in a circle. This weird fucking thing is our respawn point. You can find these hidden in these little caves spread around the Oneric Isles. And as we'll see later, there's very little that the world of Dread Delusion doesn't include in its grander schemes and thematic choices, and this respawn totem is no exception. But for now, we can continue on across this bridge to another of the Inquisition drones with the corpse of a soldier nearby. The drone tells us the area is being patrolled by Dark Star mercenaries, and he recommends sneaking by them to avoid combat. And he hints to us to always be on the lookout for ways to sneak past difficult enemies, which seems to be a recommendation we carry with us for the rest of our playthrough. And a nearby sign tells us that while crouched, we can sneak and perform sneak attacks for multiplicative damage, obviously similar to the Elder Scrolls games. So, we have the option of heading forward into battle against the few mercenaries patrolling the path to our left, or sneak along the path to our right out of their range. Having chosen a rogue-type build, I opted for the latter. As we head past them, we come to a small village of houses billowing smoke and set aflame, half destroyed from battle. As we get closer, we can see Inquisition agents and Dark Star mercenaries battling each other in the middle of the road, strewn with dead bodies. After finishing off the remaining mercenary, we can find another Inquisition drone that mentions the injured Inquisition agent beside him can be convinced to give up extra information that may help us. This introduces us to the charm mechanic. Speaking to him, he resigns himself to death, but we have a dialogue option available to try and charm him for more information. This system is very straightforward. Every charm option in the game has a numerical value, and our charm stat needs to meet or exceed that value to succeed. If we choose to charm him, we can see the text tells us that we succeed. And if you fail, you can see a message in the top right of your screen telling you the required value needed to pass the check. Having successfully charmed him, he tells us that we can find his crashed drop pod near the waterfall up the stream just outside. Nice. Continuing along, down the road past the burning buildings leads us to another drone who teaches us about lockpicking. When you try to lockpick a door, a standard 6-sided dice is rolled. If you roll at or higher than the door's difficulty, you open it. If you fail, you lose 1 lockpick. Depending on your lockpicking skill, the number required to open the door lowers, making it easier to open. But ultimately, it's always down to some amount of luck. In this tutorial example, it says we need at least a 2 to open it, and I succeed by rolling a 6, so we don't lose a lockpick and the door opens. Heading inside and up the stairs, another drone teaches us about a skill more unique to Dread Delusion. Using our lore skill, we can find hidden items with magical properties and interact with them to open locked or hidden doors. These items can take the form of candles, skulls, paintings, and more. And to open the locked door, you have to activate all of them in the nearby area. Once you do, you'll receive a message stating something has changed. The lore skill is a flat number requirement, just like the charm skill. If your skill is too low to interact with the item, a message will appear telling you the level you need. And one other minor note is that every time you use your lore skill, it'll use a small amount of your mana, so keep an eye on that if you use your mana often. From here, we come to Inquisitor Ignavius and continue the story. But before that, there's a few more base mechanics we should cover. We also have the barter skill, which is exactly how it sounds. The higher your barter skill, the better prices you get when buying and selling items to a merchant. The remaining skills and stats are all related to combat, so let's talk about that. After we speak to Inquisitor Ignavius, which we'll come back to, we gain access to a small training camp for Inquisition agents. Here, we can learn all the basics of combat and how the other stats and skills I mentioned work. Using left click to attack, the damage we deal depends on our current stamina, and as we're wandering across the Oneric Isles, our max stamina will steadily decrease as we grow tired. We can recover our max stamina by using potions or sleeping in a bed, but if your temporary max stamina reaches below half of its normal max value, you become fatigued, temporarily reducing all of your stats. This is rarely a real issue in the game, as potions and options to get back to resting points are plentiful. Next, we learn about blocking and parrying. You can hold right-click to block incoming attacks, and if you block just as the attack lands, you'll parry the attack, as indicated by this white vignette around your screen and the subtle sound effect that activates. Just to the left of the training platform is a small encampment of tents fit with bedrolls to rest. Interacting with the save crystal here for the first time, it saves the game for us, and we receive the Return Home spell. This spell is very useful, and we can cast it to return to the last save crystal we interacted with, even if it's on the other side of the world. Pretty convenient. I've actually used this spell after accidentally falling off an island towards my death, but managed to teleport away just in time to save myself. It's super handy. So, the last few things I want to mention are your defense, agility, and spellcast skills. Defense is exactly what you think, and is boosted by magical items and the armor you're wearing. The value is shown here. Agility refers to how fast you move as well as your jump height, and this is actually an extremely useful skill, as traveling across the vast open lands of the Oneric Isles can take a lot of time without certain travel mechanics unlocked. And finally, spellcasting, which is a bit more complicated. Generally speaking, spellcasting increases the strength of your spells and how quickly they cast, but along with that are the effects of the individual spells themselves. I'm not entirely certain how your spellcasting potency affects each spell, as there's a wide variety of types of spells, from simple magic attacks, to summoning minions, to more utility skills like health regen. For my playthrough, I only really used utility spells, so spellcasting was more of a minor focus for me. And that's basically it. That's a majority of the game's base mechanics. Later, we'll see how these mechanics are used and what role they play in our experience throughout the game. For now though, we can finally return back to the game's story by meeting Inquisitor Ignavius. So, as we approach the Inquisition column just outside the Blinding Light Fortress, it unfolds a bridge for us to ascend up to the top to speak with the Inquisitor. He gives us some background and details about how to enter the fortress, noting that we can enter through the main entrance and fight off enemies, or take a side path to sneak into the fortress, but has a few traps and obstacles in the way. And of course, being a rogue, I chose the latter. Heading into the side entrance past a few guards, I lockpick my way in and quickly come to some traps in the hallway. Now, traps are not really a major threat in this game, and to be honest, very little things are. This game isn't very difficult on normal difficulty, neither in combat, skill checks, avoiding traps, or anything else for that matter. But this is one of those times where I honestly don't mind that much. The love I developed for Dread Delusion had little to do with the game's difficulty and the gameplay moment to moment, and everything to do with this incredible world, story, and writing, which we'll go into more detail later. But I also think the game could still benefit from it being at least a little more difficult. Luckily, the developers put a hard mode version of the game in the last major update they released, which honestly makes a huge difference. I introduced this game to a friend, and after watching them try hard mode, I can definitively say that the experience is dramatically different. So, if you decide to play this game and you care more about a fun, exploration-based RPG with a great story, then just play on normal. But if you want the addition of difficult combat forcing you to carefully consider the choices you make while exploring dangerous locations, then hard mode may be worth trying out. And since hard mode really resolves a lot of the complaints I initially had with the difficulty, I'm not going to spend any time nitpicking it. But I'll just say this. I only died twice in my entire playthrough on the game on normal difficulty, and those 2 deaths were due to glitches while riding elevators. At no point did I ever die from combat, and I definitely never died from traps either. And getting back to the traps, they function just like door locks using the lockpicking skill. And if you want to be super safe, you can lockpick and disable them all, or just... yeah. Anyway, after we make our way past those horrifically deadly traps, we head into a nearby vent to sneak through the fortress deeper into the interior. As we reach the end, we find a storage room filled with items, and most notably, some interactable objects nearby. In particular, if we interact with the papers and maps laid out across the tables here, we get this information. An assortment of maps, notes, and diagrams clutter the table, detailing the planned exploits of the Dark Star mercenaries. One in particular catches your eye, an expedition to the cursed Underlands, far below the Sky Realms. The cursed Underlands. We don't really know anything about this place yet, but now we know it's Vela's plan to head there despite how deadly the introductory cutscene made it sound. Continuing through the fortress, we find an elevator that takes us to the flat surface atop. Here, we come to a walled area with a stream cutting through. Inside, 2 buildings are joined together by large metal pipes, with an airship docked overhead. There's a few nooks and crannies to explore here, but there's one thing that really caught my eye. If you climb on top of these large bluish pillars and look through the window into the nearby structure, you can see this. There's some sort of bizarre, hideous creature waiting within that we can just barely see. There's only one entrance to this building, and it's currently locked, so we're just gonna have to make a mental note of this for now and hope for the best. All we can do now is head into the large metal and wooden tower across from it and make our way up. Inside, we can find a small airship that's inoperable, and some ramps and stairways leading us up to finally meet Vela Kalos. Vela Kalos stands with gravitas, her voice piercing the clatter of the ship. You notice blood seeps from her armor. She's wounded but hides it well. Loose the sails, and why is the anti-grav engine not running? Suddenly, you catch her eye. We're given some dialogue options, but ultimately, whatever we choose, the conversation ends the same way, with her declaring, "Prepare yourself, straggler, great deeds are afoot. Deeds that will bring the apostatic union's tyranny to an end, and that will usher in a new age of heaven." And she promptly sails away into the sunset, or neutron star set, whatever. And after she sails away, our quest updates, and as we turn around to head back into the previous rooms, we find that the Inquisition has come to capture the fortress and has already set up base here. Well, that was quick. Inside the fortress's main cabin, we can find a save crystal, a bed, a chest containing a new spell called Entice, which lets you control enemies for a short period of time, and the ghostly woman again, here to tell us more cryptic information. She tells us, Vela spent countless nights here, hunched at her desk by the light of a candle. While the rest of her crew slept, she would pore over sky charts and scour old tomes for shreds of arcane knowledge. Back then, when I was flesh and blood, I thought she was driven by a pure desire to carve out a better world. But in time, I came to think of her as little more than a frightened girl, trying to fix something broken inside herself. For there is a thorn in Vela's heart that she cannot remove. Sometimes its maddening scratch pushes her to greatness. Other times, it twists her into cruelty and barbarism. She then warns us and says if we wish to learn more about Vela and her past, we should find her at an old manor drifting on the northeastern edge of Hallowshire. As we progress through the game, this ghostly figure's quest will move from major location to location, where she'll enlighten us to Vela's past, providing details and motivations for her grand scheme. But we won't be reaching Hallowshire for a while, so let's head back downstairs and speak to the High Confessor, who waits for us to report back to her. Speaking to her, she says we must continue to follow Vela's footsteps and find out where she's heading to, and she claims to have a lead we can follow. And then, she laughs to herself, but this turns into a pained series of retches. After a moment, you think she may have vomited. You? The Confessor excuses herself and continues. The Oneric Isles are home to a number of former Darkstar mercenaries. My superiors would rather I executed them, but she is silent for a moment. They're of more use to us alive. If anyone knows where Vela went, they will. I would start with Jack Basalt, a former Navy captain turned sellsword. We have already contacted him and arranged a meeting. You can find him at the Wobbly Noggin pub in Hallowtown in the center of the Oneric Isles. Basalt has promised to direct us towards his comrades in exchange for the polymath's pardon. He can help you find the others. So, our goal then is to head into Hallowtown, which she informs us is south through the town of Pwyll and into the region of Hallowshire. But first, we have to acquire an Apostatic Union passport to pass through the gate bridge to enter Hallowshire. She recommends heading into Pwyll to try and acquire one, but she warns us, and be careful. These islands are on the very fringe of Apostatic Union territory. There may be worshippers, or even minor gods who have fled the Union's purges tucked away here. The only assuredly faithless place is Hallowtown, and beyond Hallowshire's borders there is ground even Union boots won't tread upon. To the east, the Clockwork Kingdom is in full-blown crisis, while the people of the Endless Realm to the west are cursed to never die. The final thing she mentions is we've progressed from Prisoner 17 to Confessor 17. Yay, I guess? From here, we can either ask the High Confessor or Inquisitor Ignavius, standing on the platform across from her, a variety of questions about this strange world and its history. And this is the point where Dread Delusion shifted from feeling like a fairly simple, standard MDRPG and began to pull me in with its deeply fascinating themes and mystery that the world presents to us. So after speaking with them and learning everything they have to say, let's lay out what we know so far. We are a prisoner of the Apostatic Union, a major faction of the Sky Realms that took up power and led a resistance against the gods of this land during the God War around 40 years ago, a very recent event. For 400 years, Wiccan covens communicated directly with these gods, gaining favor and power, but at the cost of binding blood contracts. And so, the Apostatics fought back against the gods, taking up arms with the goal of casting the world into a new era of enlightenment and reason. This is where the Blinding Light Fortress comes into play. It was built during the God War as a bastion for the Union to fight back against the gods. They built the giant cannon atop their fortress and shot void steel spears, these large blue and golden structures, into their bodies, killing them off. And from what we learn, humanity did manage to kill off most of the gods of the Sky Realms, but there are still Wiccan covens and minor gods hidden around the Oneric Isles, as the Apostatic Union only recently began to move into this territory and enforce its rule. The Apostatic Union, from what we can gather, appears to be an authoritarian, draconian faction that has taken over the majority of the Sky Realms and instituted harsh laws and punishments geared toward preventing any form of god worship from ever sprouting up again. If you ask the High Confessor why she's forced to serve the Union from within this brutal metal coffin, she tells us that in her former life she committed many heinous crimes: unlicensed spellweaving, conversing with gods, abetting armed conflict, and more. But, she continues, this iron coffin is an honor, a privilege. The pain it delivers, the exquisite torment, sharpens my reason. And it was specially designed to insulate my mind, lest I hear the gods' cruel whispers and forget my penance. So, from what we see of the Inquisitor drones from before, and even the High Confessor herself, the cruel and unusual punishments of the Apostatic Union are severe, and their grip on the Sky Realms is strong. This leads us to Vela, the leader of the Darkstar mercenaries. We learn that the mercenaries previously worked alongside the Apostatic Union, taking care of jobs that the Union itself couldn't do, and they even helped fight alongside them during the God War. But since then, Vela delusion, as it's described, of making some sort of heaven has gained the attention of the Apostatic Union as a major cause of concern, and so our journey begins to track her down and attempt to capture her on the Union's behalf. And the High Confessor herself expresses hatred and malice towards Vela as she's been following her across the Sky Realms. We're told that Vela and her bands of mercenaries captured and restored the abandoned Blinding Light Fortress, which leads us to the present, and our orders to infiltrate and capture her. But of course, our attempt failed, leading us to seek help from our former allies, starting with Jack Basalt. Besides these major plot details, we can get some lovely flavor text about the world by speaking to Ignavius and asking about the Union heartland from which he and his wife typically reside. He describes his home. I'm from Lundell, a place full of windswept hills, soggy marshes, and crumbling castles, circled by a blue Neuron star. We also have a weakness for ale. There's also Bjorn, known for its universities and fine wine, and Slev, a rugged, wet land where criminal elements are rife. But many would consider the most important Union realm to be Vena. It's a warm, beautiful archipelago full of orchards bathed in yellow starlight, and home to the Union's most important city. Riova. Riova is where the Union Council of Polymaths meet. It's a city full of floating houses all strung together with bridges and ropes, with gondolas drifting between them. When you're in the middle, it's said you can't see a hint of sky. There's buildings in every direction. None of this is particularly relevant to us or the journey we go on, as we'll never be able to see these lands, sadly. But I wanted to highlight the effort that the writers put into the beautiful imagery they put into the game that adds so much character to the world we're inhabiting by inviting us to imagine the wondrous landscapes and enchanting cities that make up this world. I personally appreciate it, and I think it's fantastic. But getting into more of the relevant locales, he tells us more of Hallowshire, the Clockwork Kingdom, and the Endless Realm. He describes Hallowshire as a place that's been under Union control since the God War, but has since been neglected. He says the following: "That means there's still cultists lurking among the hills, not yet flushed out. There are even whispers of gods lurking in nasty nooks and crannies." But his tone shifts as he remarks that luckily, a new council chamber headed by a new polymath in Hallowshire should deal with the problem swiftly. Moving on to the Endless Realm, he describes a kingdom ruled by the Queen of Silver, and says, "Last I heard, they packed in all that flesh-eating business, and started farming some sort of mindless meat. Fancy that, ghouls with a conscience." As for his opinion on the Clockwork Kingdom, well, the less said about that place, the better. It used to be known as Cardova, and during the God War, they aided the Apostatics in overthrowing the Wiccans and their gods. They even made the Blinding Light Fortress, as well as many other war machines. But they were always a little big for their boots. Despite having the best alchemists and etherists in the Sky Realms, they got the mad notion of making some sort of magical utopia where every foolish peasant could cast a spell. Utter nonsense, I say. Only, for a while it seemed like the buggers actually got it to work. The stuff that was coming out of the newly formed Clockwork Kingdom was even making the erudite Academy scholars blush with envy. At least, until their mechanical king went mad and threw the whole place into chaos. Now it's a frozen wasteland full of malfunctioning robots and rotting crops. So, that's the majority of the information we learned from Inquisitor Ignavius and the High Confessor in this section. But, buried in all that exposition, we're introduced to some of the game's major themes and writing choices that deserve some serious praise. As we continue along through the game's narrative, these points will come up again and again, so now's a great time to go into some of them with greater detail. Something you may have noticed in this brief section of exposition is that something about the information we're given, or how it's delivered, just feels off. This is how I remember feeling when I initially spoke to these characters and tried to process what I was being told. Every person we come across, and everything that they've said so far, feels untrustworthy in some way. What Dread Delusion does excellently is give each character a clear, distinct voice of their own. The High Confessor speaks to us in a harsh, demanding tone, giving us direct orders and hinting at disdain for us. But even when not speaking about us directly, that same scathing seriousness applies to anyone, or anything, that deviates from the Apostatic Union's ideals. Or, with Inquisitor Ignavius, he speaks to us in an optimistic, carefree tone that sees the world through an appreciative, curious lens. And when he describes the Union Heartland, or his home, he paints his descriptions with romantic language and a nostalgic longing, a total contrast to the harsh nature of the High Confessor or the Inquisitor drones. But that's also contrasted against his casual prejudices thrown at the Clockwork Kingdom or the Endless Realm. And as we come across more characters on our journey, you'll see how the intense attention to detail the writers have taken makes each character feel like a truly distinct person that lives within this world. Their fears, their beliefs, and their flaws all add texture to the experience. But coming back to that strange sense of unease that speaking to these characters elicits, everything we're told and our understanding of the world comes to us from the heavily shaded bias of the person we're speaking to. The High Confessor's explanations of the God War, while presumably seated in fact, are glazed with a sense of triumph and dogmatic hatred towards the Wiccans, and any who would potentially aid them. And Inquisitor Ignavius, who obviously has a deep love and appreciation of the Apostatic Union and its heartlands, exhibits this off-putting disgust towards the other regional factions of the Anaric Isles. Between the two of them, the little bit of information that we have about this world is all through the heavy veil of an Apostatic Union bias. The vile Wiccans worked with the cruel, evil gods to deny humanity its enlightenment and choice to decide on its own. And it's only through the great war and triumph of the Apostatic Union and its allies that their tyranny was able to be overthrown. But the horrible reality is that the Wiccans, like rats, scurry in the night, nurturing their gods back to power, threatening the return of the same fate the great Apostatics bled to free us all from. The High Confessor shows this with her explicit, violent language directed at Vela, the greatest threat the Apostatic Union has faced thus far. And Inquisitor Ignavius shows us this with his disturbing optimism, separating himself from the harsh reality of the Inquisition's cruel and horrific punishments that even we can see as clear as day. But in our ignorance, all we can do is listen and try to determine for ourselves what we think is true. It's up to us to decipher this bias and try to find the true answers. But to do this, we need more information beyond the propagandistic voices of the Apostatic Union's lackeys. So, for now, we'll head south to the settlement of Pwyll and continue our journey to uncover the truth. Pwyll is a quaint little town floating above a massive forest of mushrooms and creatures below. Here, the town's main export is scry shrooms, a hallucinogenic mushroom usually brewed into tea. As we're told repeatedly by the denizens here, drinking the scry shroom tea allows you to see into the future. The experience is described as having your consciousness submerged into the temporal current, or plunges you into the river of time so you can see the bends and currents rushing towards you. And given the nature of this bizarre magical world, I had no reason to really question it at first. But as we probe further, we begin to realize the truth. Even those who swear by the tea's power admit it only works some of the time. The town's mayor, Olwyn, tells us, "You see, not everything the scryshrooms predict will come to pass. The cosmos is a web of infinite possibilities, and the future is not struck in stone. The user's hopes and fears can also taint the vision in, rare cases." This is a statement that's clearly personal. When we first approach her in her home, we find her under the influence of a hysteric hallucination of being on fire after drinking scryshroom tea. And once we calm her down, she returns to business as usual, as if the experience was totally normal. We hear repeatedly the same justification. The scryshroom tea doesn't always work, but sometimes it does, and that's good enough. Even Inquisitor Ignavius asks us for scryshroom tea when we first meet him, and if we purchase some and bring it back to him, he pulls out a tiny metal teapot from his belt with some water already boiling and ready. He's clearly used this before. After asking us to wait for a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, the tea finishes brewing and he remarks at the wonderful taste. He even tells us that this tea is for him to bring home to his wife, yet he has a boiling teapot on his belt ready to indulge as soon as we bring it to him. I began to wonder if the tea we brought him was ever meant for anyone else at all. He speaks of the Union's triumph of bringing rationality and progress back to the world, freeing humanity from the confines of mysticism and the magical power of old gods, and yet here he stands, drinking a lie that promises the very thing he claims to oppose. And like him, the people of Pwyll allowed themselves to drown in that same delusion. They all know that the tea doesn't tell the future reliably, if at all, but they tell themselves that even within the chaos of their hallucinogenic trip, that if they predict even a sliver of what the future holds, then that's justification enough. And so they keep drinking in the lie and selling it out to others. But we also have to ask, what choice do they have? The town of Pwyll survives on the export of their scryshroom tea. Without it, the town has no future. But, as we quickly learn, that future is already under threat now. Lud, the mayor's teenage son, tells us the town's scryshroom yields have declined year after year since the Waymaster, Colwich, came into town with the Apostatic Union and killed Angwin, Pwyll's local god. And to be fair, what we learn from not only the mouth of Colwich, who we can be sure is influenced by Union bias, but also from the other residents of the town, Pwyll's success producing scryshrooms came about by Angwin's divine power, but of course at a cost. Blood sacrifices to feed the bountiful harvest. So, when Colwich and the Union slaughtered him with the god-killing void spears, the harvest began to wither year after year. But of course, as an agent of the Apostatic Union, Colwich has far greater concerns than Pwyll's precarious future. When we first meet him, he demands that we let him weigh us? As we step onto the large scale that has no counterweight, he analyzes against the moral standard, the magical counterweight embedded into the fulcrum atop this uniquely magical scale. As he explains, the scales measure us not by mass, but by virtue, against the moral standard, a real, living person chosen by the Apostatic Union for exemplifying the Union's highest ideals. The weight of his greatness highlights our moral failures. But this isn't just some form of ideological criticism. This is an echo of the Salem witch trials, a ritualized tool of paranoia seeking to expose and eliminate the Wiccans and their sympathizers. And as Colwich mentions, he believes there are those within Pwyll who, knowing the town's struggles, wish to return back to the old ways and seek help from gods once again. To verify this, we speak to the townsfolk who suggest we investigate at night, where we find a mysterious hooded figure wandering around town. Following him, we quickly find ourselves down a hidden path into a cave filled with research, and the skull of Angwin, pierced by void spears. When we return to Colwich, he sends us off to the sacred shroom to the west, where he believes someone is planning to reignite the blood contract from the town's troubled past. So as we descend to the mushroom forest below, fighting off monsters and finding some useful spells and items, we arrive at the behemoth before us. As we make our way to the top, either through battle or the stealth route, we reach a fleshy, pulsing antechamber, filled with bizarre and horrific organs decorating the room, and there, behind a locked door, we find Lude, the mayor's shy, nervous son, bravely, but foolishly, attempting to sacrifice himself for the sake of his home. Here, we're met with a choice. We can attempt to convince Lude that his sacrifice isn't worth it, and that he should return to his home. That even if Pwyll falls to ruin, the Sky Realms are filled with possibility. But if we fail, like I did, you're only left with two final options that carry an intense weight that's inescapable. Either we cut Lude loose and save him from his foolish and childish delusion that his sacrifice will be worth it to save Pwyll and his mother, or we let him go through with it, reigniting the blood contract with Angwin, and potentially saving Pwyll by returning the bountiful Scryshroom harvest to the town, at least for a time. For me, this moment was when I began to truly understand what Dread Delusion has to offer. As I spoke to all the residents of Pwyll and learned their individual personalities, their fears, their concerns, their pride, and their delusions, I felt a real sense of responsibility for the decision I made here. Of course, when I turn the game off and go back to my normal life, nothing about the experience is real, and I can't even guarantee that you'll feel the same way that I did, that the writing and the setting and dialogue will draw you in and have the same weight of making this decision as I experienced. But for me, this is where I began to realize what it can offer. A story, world, lore, characters, aesthetic, and writing that all work together and draw me into the world and make me feel like a true part of it. And so, with the weight of this moral decision before me, I decided to free Lude from his childish delusion, against his wishes. And the weight of that decision carried through with me in the interactions that followed. As I headed back to Pwyll, I spoke to Colwich, who thanked me and remarked at Lude's foolishness. And I spoke to Olwen, who we found in tears thanking us for pulling her away from the distractions that have left her son so unattended. And I spoke to Lude, who, while not forgiving us just yet for our decision, admitted that seeing his mother's reaction made him realize his life was more valuable than he thought. But the quest ends with a solemn reminder that my decision has likely doomed Pwyll to ruin. However, not all decisions we face throughout the game will be as straightforward as this one. We can justify to ourselves maybe the people of Pwyll will be okay. They can just pick up and move somewhere else. It might be dangerous and there's no guarantee, but at least there's a chance. But things are not always going to be that simple. As we finally move past Pwyll into the main region of Hallowshire, the world opens up to us, providing so much more for us to explore and experience. But as much as I would love to cover it all, for the sake of time, I'll just focus on the major themes and plot points of the world as we continue. Hallowshire is a broad region centered around a massive, open field made up of small farmlands, scattered homes, and a growing sense of desperation. The people here struggle to survive as the Apostatic Union cast out their god, Pegoth, causing once bountiful harvests to recede into ruin. At the edges of the field are various paths leading us to other small sub-locations, as well as roads to the other two main regions, the Endless Realm and the Clockwork Kingdom, which require yet more Apostatic Union passports to access. As you take in the lands before you, the first thing you'll likely notice is the floating islands beset in the center of the open fields, connected to the land below by a stone bridge. This path leads us to Hallowtown, the primary city of this region, and the Wobbly Noggin Inn, where Jack Basalt awaits. Jack Basalt is a former Darkstar mercenary, and the only lead we have to figure out what Vela is up to and where she's gone. When we approach him, he greets us with suspicion and frustration, clearly unhappy to be working with the Apostatic Union. As we fill him in on what happened so far, he suggests that Vela has likely headed down to the Underlands, the scorched surface deep below the Sky Realms. When we probe further, he tells us about the World Rend, a cataclysmic event that destroyed the surface of the planet 400 years ago, and forced civilization into the scattered, floating islands that we inhabit now. He tells us that Vela has decided to go back down to the Underlands seeking the terrible power we've heard briefly mentioned before, to create her heaven, and he elaborates further, delving into his past of Vela. As we learn, Basalt served with Vela under her father, Admiral Close, and as she grew, he trained Vela into the powerful warrior she is today alongside someone he briefly mentions as the Emberian. He describes them together. Through blizzards, cipher storms, and cannon volleys, those sisters thrived until the Deshawn massacre. Basalt doesn't elaborate there, but tells us that's when she decided to leave to form her own band of mercenaries, and when he decided to follow her, until eventually the band split in a mutiny. He tells us that Vela found something, a map, that pointed to something impossible. She'd use it to make a heaven of the Sky Realms, she said, changing the fabric of reality so folk don't know poverty, or injustice, or even death. While some of the Dark Stars continued to follow her through her path, the other half tried to convince her to see reason. But as she ignored them and forced them down to the Underlands anyway, they split off and mutinied, leaving a path of blood and chaos in their wake. Vela managed to escape with her loyalists, and the rest spread out on their own, leading us to now. As Jack Basalt tells us, there are 3 people he recommends we seek out for help: former Darkstar mercenaries and closest former allies of Vela Kolos, the Emberian, the alleged last of her kind, hidden somewhere in Hallowshire, the Endless Duchess, a powerful cipher wizard who returned to her homeland, the Endless Realm, and Caxton Frost, a genius engineer of the Clockwork Kingdom who has since returned home. He tells us to seek them out and send them back to the Blinding Light, where they will all gather together and work out a plan. But as we begin to head off, he offers one final warning. And that thing Vela's looking for, she mustn't use it. Nobody must ever use it. You hear me? If you've any sense, you'll make sure it stays buried down there. Well, that's ominous, to say the least. So, with our goals set and the world open to us, we can begin to explore what lies deeper within the region of Hallowshire. Heading into Hallowtown, there's a lot of shops, interesting side quests, and hidden secrets to explore here. Each area in Dread Delusion offers many of its own memorable quests, each packed with surprising emotional and thematic depth. But we'll be focusing on the ones that stand out the most. In Hallowtown, a newly appointed Apostatic Union polymath and his fellow agents have established a headquarters, determined to root out any lingering god worship, no matter how minor. But as we learned, the absence of the god Pageth is causing a major famine across the region. So as we explore through the surrounding area and begin to uncover its many secrets, we find ourselves at a crossroads yet again. Do we help the Apostatic Union prevent the horrors of the gods and their blood contracts from ever returning to Hallowshire? Or do we save the people from starvation by restoring the god Pageth to his former glory? Like in Pwyll, the choice is ours. Except this time, the results of our actions can be seen much more clearly. But that's only one of the many choices that await us here. As I made my way through the various quests of the region, I felt a mixed set of emotions. On one hand, there's a real sense of excitement and wonder when exploring the Oneric Isles. With a world so vast and open with varied degrees of elevation and vantage points, there were so many opportunities for me to just stop for a moment and take it all in. One of the biggest benefits of an open-world RPG is the ability to see something in the distance that instills a sense of curiosity and adventure, and then setting out on a goal to finally reach that landmark. With Dread Delusion's attention to detail and creativity in its architecture and world design, there is always something off in the distance that catches your attention as distinctly different. There's the open fields of Hallowshire, dotted with various cliffs, roads, and floating islands housing great castles and curious structures off in the distance. Or the giant creature the mayor of Pwyll was ranting about off in a fort in the forest below. Or the even more gargantuan flying mollusk always visible at the very fringes of the sky. With little exception, you'll have the chance to investigate and explore every aspect of this world that you can see. Every new location filled me with that same curious excitement for adventure, but every time was met with a sense of inevitable dread. There's Hallow Castle, home to a land stricken with a horrible curse, turning its people into eldritch creatures that roam around the castle grounds. As we learn, even the Duke and his son were afflicted by Pageth's curse, And so, making a deal with the capricious god, the Duke took a curse unto himself to suffer an eternal agony to keep the plague at bay. And it's our goal to try and help him, but with limited options. And then there's the Erudite Academy we hear mentioned throughout the land, a flying island that moves unimpeded hundreds, if not thousands of feet above the Oneric Isles. Here, the Academy is filled with various scholars researching the world's great mysteries, including the ones that let us chart the Isles and fill out our map. The NPCs and books here can provide us with mountains of information and lore about this strange world, as well as cosmic concepts that the writers have enriched the game with. From cipher magic that keeps airships afloat, to the ancient, broken portals scattered around the Isles we can activate as teleporting shortcuts, to a brief history of the world explaining the concepts of the Emberians who dwelled on the surface with massive, sprawling Magitech cities filled with lost knowledge caused by the eventual world rend. But as we come to find out, someone has been hiding a secret here in the Academy, and an agent of the Union asked for our help to uncover it. From the Erudite Academy, you can see almost everything across the entire region of the Oneric Isles. But before we can explore it all, we still have our primary goal, finding the Emberian hidden somewhere in Hallowshire. We start in Hallowtown. Besides spending some time crafting potions, upgrading weapons and armor, or completing various side quests, we can find our way to the Emporium of Oddities, a shop that specializes in magical spells and items, which can be extremely beneficial. After hearing some rumors, apparently the Emberian passed by here, so we can inquire with the shopkeep here further. He tells us she wouldn't say much, but he saw her heading out to the forest west of Hallowshire. He remarks about her antique Emberian armor as well, and suggests that she may have taken interest in an old rusty turban in a ruin deeper in the forest. Well, that's as good of a lead as we can get here, so after heading out and exploring the region more and taking in the sights, I made my way to where the shopkeeper mentioned. In this distinct-looking ruin, we can find her, a woman clad in bizarre antique armor wearing a massive sword, the Emberian. After convincing her not to slaughter us by mentioning basalt, we inquire about Vela and her goals. She expresses her fear of Vela and her impressive feats, fighting off an entire tavern with one hand behind her back, slicing the head off a void beast, and going toe-to-toe with a god. But she also considers Vela like a sister and owes her life. The Emberian gives her account of her history with Vela, finding the map to the Underlands below and leading the mutiny herself, blasting her cannons into Vela's ship and slaughtering some of her crew. But more importantly, this is where we learn of the Cradle, the strange thing that Vela is seeking out deep in the Underlands. And the Emberian describes it as having the ability to rewrite the language of the cosmos. We learn through various points in the game, in particular the Clockwork Kingdom and Erudite Academy, that the world is constructed off of a language called the Sixfold Cipher. Humans use this language in very primitive forms to create magical technology that we see around the world, as well as craft the magical spells and items that we interact with. So, we can surmise that if the Cradle can rewrite this language, it can rewrite the fabric of reality itself. The Emberian offers her opinion, stating her fear that using it is more likely to end the world than save it, just like the Emberians did during the World Rend. But if the Emberians were wiped out hundreds of years ago, why is this woman calling herself the Emberian? Well, as we ask for her help in pursuing and stopping Vela, she declines, stating her need to seek out her own answers. As it turns out, she plans to seek out some Emberian ruins somewhere in Hallowshire and plans to go there to seek out those answers. She tells us, "For a long time, I've had the strangest dreams of impossible cities that no mason could build, which twinkle with 1,000 tiny stars. I want to know if my dreams are real." So, without much choice, we follow the Emberian to Rustburg, the abandoned ruin of a town that used to trade in Underlands metal and Emberian antiques. Here, we fight off bandits on our way through the various corridors and complex, elevated terrain throughout the small city until we finally reach the top where an ancient Emberian elevator awaits. The elevator takes us up to a nearby floating island overhead and this massive vault where the Emberian awaits inside. We find her sitting on broken down machines, panting with her sword by her side. As she heads further inside, we find her on her knees, looking up at ancient vats of liquid housing decaying bodies. When we ask what this is, she tells us, "A good question. I've searched for the answer all my life. You know, she found me in one of these places, in one of those coffins. It was Vela. She was 8 years old. When she pulled me out of that machine, coughing up ancient fluids, I couldn't have been much older. Nothing to explain who I was, how I got there. Just an inscription on the vat which read Orlaith. So that's what they called me. As she tells us, Vela's father took her in and raised her like his own daughter, but she could never find anyone like herself, the last Emberian. When we ask about what she is, she replies, I'll never know for sure. I understand that now. But though none of these rusted tombs have given me answers, each one has fueled my anger. The Emberians threaded their needle through the world, altering its tapestry to their whims. And for what? The more I learn, the more I see their greed, their self-interest, their lust for power. And in the end, it destroyed them. It destroyed our world. Scholars can debate over scant evidence for an age, but who doesn't feel the truth in their guts? 400 years ago, the Emberians caused the world rend with their feckless ambition. When we ask what she plans to do, she tells us that she believes everyone alive today is on the path to repeat the same mistakes as the Emberians. The Apostatic Union, the Inquisition, the Clockwork Kingdom, all seek to harness the same ancient evil, and she thought Vela understood that, until she fell to the same delusion. And so we ask Orlaith, the Emberian, to join us on our journey to stop Vela, to stop her from leading the world to the same fate. She agrees, and heads off to the Blinding Light to await us as we seek out the next former ally of Vela Kalos, the Endless Duchess. As we complete the various quests of Hallowshire, we can eventually acquire another Apostatic Union passport, granting us access to the Endless Realm. The Endless Realm is a relatively small region of the Oneric Isles. Stepping in, we're met with an open landscape of tall cliffs broken up by dead trees, stone, Gothic architecture with stained glass windows, a monstrous flying creature overhead that invites fear and excitement, and this. The loud roar of some ancient creature from somewhere invisible to us. As we make our way down the roads of this strange, undead land, we come to Sepulchre, a towering Gothic city attached to a cliff far above our heads. There are 2 guards on the road here that can give us directions. South from here is a mausoleum, the crystal mines, and a path leading to the Duchess's estate. And up north are the flesh farms and the Cadaver Keep. In Sepulchre, while not nearly as intricate as Hallowed Town, it's filled with some shops, quest givers, and an inn with some interesting NPCs we could speak to. Most notably around the city are these undead guards that patrol the streets. I think these guys look fucking awesome. Anyway, like the region of Hallowshire, there's a number of quests spread throughout, and unique, eye-catching structures off in the distance to explore. Within Sepulchre, we can speak to the leader of the Endless, the Queen of Silver, seated at her throne in the massive castle towering above the city below, the Castle of Ribs. When we first speak to her, we're told we're hit with a melancholy so profound it almost drives you to your knees. An emotion that reflects the nature of the Endless and their cursed existence. We can ask the Queen about the Entombed One, the creature we continue to hear roaring deep beneath the city. The Queen suggests that it's likely her father. She tells us, after the ritual to grant him eternal immortality went wrong, he fled beneath the castle and got lost within the twisting passages. The Queen's father was once the ruler of this kingdom, previously known as Verdant, a luscious green kingdom of life and hope, a stark contrast to the dead, rotting realm they inhabit now. She describes him as a healthy, strong man, but with one major flaw: a deep, unshakable fear of death. The king gathered legions of mages and priests from all across the Sky Realms with the singular goal of finding the secret to immortality. After numerous failed attempts, they concluded they would cast a spell with dozens of mages simultaneously, construct extensive ceremonial shrines, braziers, and idols across the kingdom, and more importantly, they would need to strike a deal with an ancient god that requires a sacrifice. But as she summarizes, long story short, the ritual failed. It created a twisted parody of immortality, afflicted with hunger and decay, and instead of just affecting my father, it cursed half the kingdom. Half of the kingdom were endless and hungry. The other half did not last long. The great devouring commenced. Just with this brief conversation, the history of the Endless becomes a lot clearer. There are people cursed by the hubris of their king by no fault of their own. Yet, they're forced to live eternally in their twisted perversion of existence, forced to carry the horrific memories of hundreds of years of life, holding on to every mistake, failure, and tragedy that they have encountered or witnessed. And there's no better example of this than the Endless Duchess herself, who we seek out in the southern end of the Endless Realm. We find her, hidden away in a floating tower high above the forest, out of the reach of anyone who seeks to approach her. After circumventing her security measures in the form of some lore interactables hidden around the forest that activates a bridge with cipher magic, we can reach a teleportation mirror that takes us up to her home. And it's here that we can learn more about her unique experience as one of the Endless during the time of their horrifying conversion. When we first speak to her, she questions if we're one of the Cadavers, a hostile, militant group of Endless who wish to revive the Cadaver Crusades, a war carried out by the Endless across the Oneric Isles, consuming the living for their own pleasure and dominant conquest. The Duchess, in opposition to this group, questions our loyalties and decides to dive into our mind, peering through our past and the decisions we've made during previous quests to learn our true intent. One such quest takes place at the Flesh Farms here in the Endless Realm, a place where someone named Penitent Thaw created a mass of non-sentient flesh so the Endless would never have to consume the living again. When we go there, we find an amalgamation of flesh and various body parts squirming in a large vat below. Above is Magotson, a simple man with coins on his eyes that tends to the farm for Penitent Thaw. He mentions the Ferryman, a sort of mythical deity that the Endless have begun to believe will eventually lead them from this life into the next at a small cost. And this is clearly a reference to Charon, the mythological entity from Greek myth, a ferryman who leads the dead across the river Styx at the cost of coins, placed on the eyes or in the mouth of the dead during funeral rituals. The very nature of the Endless forming a belief system around the image of a ferryman who will take them into the afterlife serves as a strong indicator of how many Endless feel about their eternal life, and how they want it to finally end. After learning about this from Magotson, we can head down the stairs towards the mass of flesh, which suddenly begins to speak to us. It communicates in straightforward, simple sentences and words, explaining that we're the first creature it has been able to communicate with, as we're the first living thing it's encountered. And of course, what could a bizarre new sentience ask but the most fundamental question of all? What is the meaning of life? Yikes. This leaves us in a rough predicament. There are many options to choose here. To learn, to make a difference, to seek pleasure, but ultimately, I decided that this pitiful creature deserves the truth. It's an abomination of flesh created with the sole purpose of providing sustenance to the Endless. And, of course, it revolts in horror of its destined fate, and asks for our help to free it. So we head upstairs to speak to Penitent Thaw, the powerful Endless mage who created this abomination to free the Endless from the need to conquer and devour the innocent. She listens to us, giving stark, pointed responses that would be expected of someone with a high intellect and condescension towards those who don't meet them at their level. But despite her flawed character, she presents a complex dilemma. If the Cadaver faction learns of the Flesh Farm's sentience, then they can excuse the consumption of any sentient flesh and reignite their crusade against the rest of the Sky Realms. But of course, her solution is to just destroy the Flesh Farms, sacrificing the innocent life of one for the life of thousands, maybe even millions. And so, the final choice lies with us. And returning to the present with the Duchess, she draws her own conclusions about our choice. But realizing we aren't her enemy, she changes the subject and delves into the history of her and her people, giving her unique experience of the events. She tells us, nearly 600 years ago, she was the Duchess of the land with a husband and 5 beautiful children. But that tale quickly turns stale as she describes it, the Great Devouring. She says her people feasted on their loved ones for decades during this period, unable to control themselves. She describes it in detail. You know the cruelest thing? There was a part of us that knew what was happening. As I tore into my husband's flesh, I howled not in anger, but in sorrow. As my daughter gorged upon the bowels of her brother, I saw the tears streaming down her face. And as I picked up my infant son, not 3 months old, I wanted to hold him, to kiss him. I never meant to. Her voice croaks, and she is silent a moment. This is when I first understood what the cursed fate of the Endless truly meant. It's easy to just conclude, oh, they ate each other and they have to remember it. That sucks. But it's an entirely different thing to see a woman cursed with a life of nearly 600 years, consuming the living flesh of her husband, her newborn child, all against her own will, caused by the careless, monstrous choices of one man whose fearful ambition exceeded his rationality. But this is not all. The Duchess's daughter, Ellen, was taken by the Cadavers and hidden away in Cadaver Keep, a massive castle home to the faction itself. And until we return her daughter to her, the Duchess can't help us pursue Vela. So, after we eventually find our way into the castle, fighting our way through hordes of endless on each level, we eventually reach the top and find Ellen's hand? That's not good. All we can do now is return to the Duchess with what little we were able to acquire. But rather than responding with deep sadness or anger or turmoil, we see the Duchess exhibit a smile, caressing the sole hand of her daughter that caresses her back. She explains, the rest of her daughter's body was lost centuries ago, a fate not uncommon to many of the Endless. And all that remains is this singular hand, which has been with her for centuries. We see this same fate repeated in another quest where we have to seek out urns filled with the cremated ashes of the Endless, who still retain their eternal life, but are cursed to exist eternally in the darkness, with no chance of escape, at least not without our help. But with Ellen's hand returned to the Duchess, her and her daughter are reunited, as best they can be. And despite her feelings of conflict around Vela and the possibility that she could free the Endless from their torment, or cause a similar fate to befall the entire world, the Duchess agrees to help us and heads off to the blinding light. There's a sense of satisfaction that comes with recruiting the Duchess and progressing further towards our primary goal, but I can't help shake the sense of dread that there may be nothing we can do to free the Endless from their eternal torment. But I'm sure as hell gonna try. With little direction to guide us, maybe we can seek out answers from the one who caused all this in the first place. The hooded king hidden below Sepulchre, echoing his rage out across the realm, literally shaking the foundations of the earth itself. When we return to Sepulchre, on the road beneath, we can find a locked door that we can acquire the key from the Queen of Silver to open. Heading inside, we find a room guarded by creatures mimicking the appearance of the guards we see in the city above. Making quick work of them, we approach a bizarre, fleshy door with a large mouth and vampiric teeth. Speaking to it, it demands the blood of someone loyal to the king to enter, which we can easily acquire thanks to Penitent Thaw's unique skills. Using the blood she provides, we enter through the flesh door into the final chamber to confront the Entombed One, who is not the king. What we find instead is a ghostly figure of a tall woman standing before a throne with the skeletal corpse of the king himself, long dead. Speaking to her, we're told that she resembles the Queen of Silver, but with a sense of life about her. Interesting. The creature demands of us with a threatening tone to explain why we're here. When I mention her father, she points to the skeletal corpse behind her and promptly begins a monologue. My kingdom rots. Soon I will destroy this entire island, along with all of my subjects. I will end this wretched curse, and finally grant my subjects the eternal peace they crave. Well, that's a pretty powerful claim, stating that she will be the one to finally end the curse of the Endless after so many centuries. We also learn that this figure is some form of the Queen of Silver herself. She tells us, I was born when she walked herself into Quicksilver and drowned at the bidding of her father. I am her bitterness, her resentment, her rage. So, this gives us context to the sacrifice that the king's ritual required. His own daughter, drowning in Quicksilver as a sacrifice to the ancient god mentioned before to free him from his own mortality. If we ask the Queen of Silver about this, she acknowledges she knew the Entombed One wasn't really her father. She hypothesizes about it, thinking the Entombed One has been growing in power from the ever-increasing faith of the Endless towards the Ferryman, the mythological proxy for their longing to finally enter the afterlife, the very thing that the Entombed One claims to soon provide. Speaking to the Entombed One again, she speaks triumphantly and harshly, echoing her resolve to end the suffering of the Endless and ask for our help, leaving us with yet another decision. But this time, with the things we know now, the horrors that the Endless face, the growing longing for death, and the thin thread of balance that holds the Endless realm from devolving into flesh-hungry chaos that can devour the realm, the choice was clear to me. So, with the Endless Realm's quest behind us, and the Emberian and Endless Duchess recruited to our side, there's one final ally that we need to seek out, Caxton Frost. And the only lead we have takes us to one of the most compelling regions of Dread Delusion, the Clockwork Kingdom. But entering the kingdom is not as easy as crossing the familiar gate bridges we've encountered before. We learn from the gate bridge guard the Clockwork Kingdom has closed off all access. Even when we present our Apostatic Union passport, he tells us the Clockwork Kingdom does not recognize the defeatist entity, indicating some sort of political strife between the Apostatic Union and the kingdom. With no other choice, we seek out alternative means to enter the kingdom. In Hallowshire, we can find a man named Mikael sitting at a dock off in the wilderness with an airship. welcoming passage into the Clockwork Kingdom at the price of an apostatic union passport. Not the most legal means, but we have little choice here. Just before we head off, he mentions someone called the Royal Factor, an old friend that can guarantee us passage in and out of the kingdom. And so, we take the airship across and are dropped off in the wilderness of the Clockwork Kingdom. The region is a large, open, barren wasteland stuck in a winter that never ends. Across the landscape, frost has covered the ground and trees, killing off any vegetation that once fed the people here. But there is still some form of life clinging to this cursed land. We can see various rusted metallic structures, old homes, many but not all abandoned, some sort of cipher magic electric poles with glyphs atop and wires running between them, various unique buildings that function for some unknown purpose, and large pipes and pillars that connect various buildings to the massive structure that stands above it all, the grand city of Ferropolis, capital of the Clockwork Kingdom. We can use our connection from Mikhail to convince the Royal Factor to let us through, while the others waiting nearby are stuck in a bureaucratic hell of a DMV-like ticket system that will become increasingly more familiar as we come to explore this strange city. The city of Ferropolis is a sprawling, massive structure of intricate, layered pathways of rusted patchwork, metal walls, and complex clockwork machines everywhere the eye can see. Moving around here takes some time to get used to, and there's a variety of subsections of the city at different layers above and below as you make your way through. The first thing we can notice are a few shops immediately near the entrance, and an imposing tower with complex cipher magic clockwork at the top, looming over the city below. The Machinarium. Under the bridge connecting to the Machinarium is a noticeable pillar completely covered in flyers and notes. Reading some of these, we quickly realize that the overwhelming majority are missing persons flyers. People looking for their daughters, their sons, their wives and husbands, sisters and brothers. One that catches our eye is recent, from a man named Oleg. He writes to his missing child, "Dear child, I don't know why I'm writing this. I don't know who you are. I don't even remember your name. I just know there's a hole in my life and nothing fills it. If you're real, please come home. I want to feel right again. Oleg Igorovich." Strange. One of the things we can recognize immediately from this letter, among much of what we can learn from the citizens throughout the city, is not only are people going missing, but people's belongings, entire rooms and buildings, and even people's memories have been steadily disappearing. The Clockwork Kingdom, and Ferropolis in particular, is a place where a sense of mystery and existential danger pervades every corner and every sense the longer you stay here. Perhaps even more disturbing than the circumstances of this land, barren with a never-ending winter, even needing breadlines to feed the citizens of Ferropolis, is the casual nature by which the citizens passively accept their fate, or even justify it. We get hints that the Clockwork King is behind these bizarre occurrences, a god of man's own creation that can bend the cipher language to his own will and shape reality. Even the power to make rooms, buildings, people, memories, and entire towns disappear overnight. And despite this common knowledge amongst the populace, we hear phrases like, "Oh my king," instead of "Oh my god." And the people speak of the king and his decisions with a sense of reverence and divinity, treating him as a sort of omniscient entity that they trust with everything. Some people will attribute the chaotic changes and problems to something called the corruption. From what little we can gather, the corruption seems to be some kind of contagion or illness, but it's impossible to really see. We'll learn more about this later. This corruption is not the only distraction the citizens hide behind to delude them from the harsh reality of their existence here. We also learn of a trade unique to the Clockwork Kingdom, bottled visions. With memories and experiences disappearing before the citizens' very eyes, bottled visions are a hookah-like device that one can inhale to relive a memory of the author who created it. There's a vision trader, Vela, who sells a variety of these which we can purchase and experience for ourselves. When we speak to him for the first time, he tries to sell us on the concept, asking us what we're looking for. Tales of romance, action, and adventure, or maybe a nightmare that chills us to the bone. Apparently, the vision trade is a booming business within the Clockwork Kingdom, a sort of replacement for books of fiction and fantasy with the benefit of experiencing the fantasy firsthand. We learn of a popular author of these visions, Horace Metcalfe. Asking Vito for more details on this person, all we learn is that they live outside the city somewhere. something we'll have to remember for later. But as we continue our exploration of Ferropolis and try to uncover the mysteries before us, we're stopped by the king's guards and a man who introduces himself as Sunil, the king's speaker. He tells us the king demands an audience with us, and with little choice, we're whisked away to the very top of the Machinarium, home of the Clockwork King. Suddenly before us is a giant metal face surrounded by various machinery and pillars with cipher magic glyphs powering the network of complicated clockwork. As we approach, we're told we can feel the king's presence. He's bigger than what we see before us, bigger than the room, bigger than the Machinarium, bigger than the sky. We feel an intense weight from the immense power of the entity before us. As the machine begins to spin up, we're told a mechanical hand begins writing an output for us. After it spouts some mechanical jargon of what one might expect from a fantastical computer program, it pronounces, "Rejoice and exult, the invocation is cast. All hail its majesty Machinus Rex, the Clockwork King." Much of the conversation with the Clockwork King is a mix of mechanical jargon, demanding and confusing questions, and paragraphs of undecipherable symbols, until suddenly it demands that we must perform something called the sacramental duty. But the explanation we receive is once again buried in code and symbols we don't understand. But more importantly, it informs us that if we fail to perform the sacramental duty, there may be a critical reality exception, 76% confidence, that may imperil the entire kingdom. Okay, great. With no real information from the king itself, all we could do is head down the elevator behind us to the main section of the Machinarium, where the machinists here work tirelessly to parse the king's orders and keep the cipher structure that makes up the mechanical deity running. One of the machinists here tells us that to understand the king, we need a cranial moderator, a clockwork cipher device grafted into our very brains to help us read and understand sixfold cipher language. But, of course, access to a cranial moderator is hidden behind 100 layers of bureaucracy, requiring years of dedication and effort to be granted the opportunity. So, we're forced to seek help elsewhere. With the city open to us, we're able to continue exploring the various mysteries of this bizarre place. To add to the layers of distraction against slandering the Clockwork King and his effect on the land, we also learn of an entity known as the Saboteur, a sort of boogeyman of Ferropolis that seeks to disrupt and dismantle the stability the king supposedly provides. The Clockwork Kingdom comes across to me as a very obvious reference to the Russian Soviet Union. Now, without spending too much time delving into political history, the parallels, tone, and themes present in the writing here are very clear. The land of the Clockwork Kingdom is overseen by a big brother-like entity reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. And though dissent isn't as heavily policed here, there are still many parallels between the self-enforced dishonesty that prevents the populace from ever facing the truth, for fear of the consequences. Instead, the people choose to delude themselves, drowning in bottled visions or alcohol, or fear of the corruption that threatens the land, or anger and hatred towards the unknown concept of the Saboteur. All of these seek to provide the populace an escape tailored to their personality. If anger at the idea of a Saboteur isn't enough to provoke you to distraction, then perhaps fear of the corruption will. Or if you're stuck in a sense of despair, maybe bottled visions can whisk you away from the harsh reality before you. The people choose to see the king as a godlike entity, treating his words and actions as the will that guides their life. But the truth always seems to slip through. We can see the citizenry react in quiet but frustrated tone at the endless winter the king allows to ravage the land. Even the breadlines can't provide enough food to keep the people happy, despite the king's power to create it. And it's impossible not to notice the disappearances of their loved ones, and even the very memories that they cling to as desperately as they can. Oleg's quest is one such example of this. We can find him in his home, falling over himself in a state of drunken anger. After helping him sober up with a potion, he explains the situation. While he can't remember his child, he found a locket in his home that says, "To my father," and feels familiar to him in some way. He points us to a building, somewhat hidden outside of Ferropolis, known as the Library of Untruths. He gives us the locket and sends us off to speak to the librarian there, hoping she just might help us. When we meet the woman there, the parallels to 1984 and the USSR become even clearer. The librarian speaks to us using carefully crafted words so as not to give anything away, but gives us gestures and hints to a hidden truth beneath the surface. And she won't even admit what this place is called, for fear of being heard and what that can mean. As we learn, this is Oleg's wife, Genevieve, who has separated from him but remains yet undivorced, once again due to the slowness of the kingdom's bureaucracy. After showing her the locket, she finally admits that the child we're seeking out likely does exist and is likely her own. After speaking with her further, she speaks rhetorically, explaining that she is totally not under some enchantment and that this is totally not the Library of Untruths, and that there is no such record of people that can be found in the reading room upstairs. Ah, well that's a damn shame. Anyway, interacting with the machine in the reading room, we learn of Oleg and Genevieve's 2 children, Galette, dead at childbirth, and Indira, dead at 7 due to the pox. When we query the machine about their third, unknown child, we find the record redacted by Sunil, the king's speaker. When we ask for any information related to this person, we receive a redacted list of people, most dead or gone, except the last one detailed as assigned to royal service. Interesting. When we probe the records further, we find some details of the third child's history. Year 3, at age 6, assigned to basic schooling, then reassigned with the family in Ferropolis at year 8. At year 16, assigned to Royal Project 2309 Horoscope. This sounds like something we'll have to remember for later. The final bit of information we're able to get is Branch 0 exhibited a low score on the Combined Aptitude and Patriotic Score Assessment, CAPS for short, but Branch 5 acquired an abnormally high score and was subsequently assigned to Royal Service. When we ask Genevieve about our findings, she tells us the broken and redacted nature of the information we found is common with records from the Corrupted Lands. And further, the region that the records indicated that the child originated from are now known as the Corrupted Lands. So, it looks like we're gonna have to head there eventually. But as we return to Ferropolis, we receive a secret note from someone telling us to meet them in private at night. We meet Afra, a machinist of the Machinarium, who helps enlighten us to the truth of how and why everything has begun to disappear from the world. She gives us a key to a locked house hidden in the lower section of Ferropolis, a slum market area that houses secret passages and a variety of questionable behaviors and goods. We find the home and the mirror portal within. Unfortunately, there's no visual for this section, and everything is communicated via text. We're told we enter a pocket dimension of the king's creation, filled with all kinds of things: buildings, homes, rooms, tables, cups, and people, all frozen in time in this other plane of existence. Everything that has disappeared from the real world. Here we meet Afra, who shows us the good news, that everything is still somewhere at least, but also gives us the bad news. She explains that the Machinist Guild gave the Clockwork King a new ability, the power to alter people with cipher magic, with the goal of creating a new society made of a new form of citizen with proper virtues and skills. But with that power, some of her colleagues began to use it to rewrite troublesome personalities, or even erase them from existence. And, as you would expect when you give an AI the power to rewrite reality, the machinists have lost control. What began as the occasional disappearance under the power of the king has been increasing in recent times. But Afra has a plan. To cast a spell she's crafted within the king's audience chamber that will prevent him from altering people without their consent. But gaining access to the chamber is extremely rare and usually limited to the king's speaker. But now, we're a recent exception. Afra explains the stakes to us. Best case, the king will balance out and the disappearances will eventually peter out on their own. Middle case, everyone in the kingdom vanishes and the entire region will succumb to the corruption. And finally, in the worst case scenario, there's a chance that the land would suffer what she describes as a mini Worldrend event that would only probably be limited to the Clockwork Kingdom and not the entire rest of the Sky Realms. Yikes. So, to help her, we need an excuse to capture the king's attention and be summoned back to the audience chamber. Afra mentions signals being captured in a graveyard outside Ferropolis, and she thinks the signal's coming from the king itself. She gives us her machinist's insignia and tells us to go speak to the graveyard keeper there for more detail. The graveyard we find isn't filled with bodies like we would expect, but rather a graveyard of dozens of broken down machines, most notably a bunch of clockwork phone boxes. As we look through the various ringing phones, we eventually find a signal from the Clockwork King himself and write down the notes to take back to Afra. But when we return to Ferropolis, something weird has happened. A familiar creature we've seen around the Oneric Isles are these silk-producing silk slugs, and the city is suddenly full of them roaming around without any explanation, only a warning from the Royal Guard not to interfere with them. Afra doesn't have an explanation either, so we just explain what we found in the graveyard. She tells us that we'll need the cranial moderator we learned of before for our audience with the king. So while she stays here and deciphers the signal, she sends us off to an old friend living outside the city in a tower alongside the mountainside. So after we head there and get the moderator installed, we can return back to Afra and continue. She thinks the signal indicates the king wants us to pass a message on for him, but not by the usual channels. She describes a royal broadcast beacon that remains in the corrupted lands, once used to send broadcast signals down to the Underlands of all places. When we ask why the king would send signals down to a place that is obviously barren of any life, the king insisted that someone or something is still down there, and contacting them was somehow critical to the kingdom's future. From what we know of Vela and her plans, this situation raises some alarms. But with little choice, Afra provides us a punch card for the broadcast tower and sends us off to the corrupted lands, a place we've been waiting to learn more about. Across a massive ravine dug out by machines parked nearby lies the corrupted lands, a sub-region of the Clockwork Kingdom covered in a strange, fleshy blight. From what little we've heard, anything that becomes infected by corruption eventually morphs into some hideous new form. The ground, the trees, the rocks, and those who once lived here have all become corrupted into some profane abomination that offends life itself. But having main character plot armor, we can head right on in with no protection and begin poking around this corrupted land. We can find mounds of pulsing flesh, tall stalks with eyeballs that appear to stare at us, and corrupted humans, a totally unrecognizable form with multiple appendages chasing after us with violent intent. After finding our way to the top of the broadcast beacon high atop the cliffs here, we put in the punch card and wait for the signal to broadcast the king's message to the Underlands below, before suddenly receiving a message we weren't expecting from a familiar voice. Mikael intercepts the signal and tells us that he's been watching, and has learned of Afra's plan to cast a spell to rewrite and fix the Clockwork King. Over half-broken radio messages, we get hints not to trust Afra, and we're told to head down to the slum markets to find someone named Reza, and to mention something called the Seventh Letter. But before we can inquire further, we lose the signal, when now the plot thickens even further. But before we head back to Pheropolis, there's still some more investigation we can do here in the corrupted lands. Not far from here is a cleanup facility run by a crew tasked with purging the corruption from the region. When we enter the camp, we see a set of cages housing some of the corrupted humans we've been fighting on our way here. With what we know of Oleg's mysterious third child, this could be our opportunity to investigate the creatures to learn more. So, we get permission from the chief of the cleanup crew and enter the cages to interact with them. With our cranial moderator installed, we can actually communicate with them, at least to some degree. What we receive is a series of messages, somewhat similar to the technical jargon of the Clockwork Kingdom, but more of a chaotic jumble of words and disconnected concepts spilling out haphazardly. Most of the corrupted here don't seem to have any relevant information, except one that mentions Project Horoscope. When we show it the locket, it becomes visibly agitated, and upon asking its name, we receive a piece of information that blew my mind when I heard it. Edict. All prior names are hereby annulled and shall be as dust. Come on now, we have to go. Sincerely, your loving daughter, Afra Mishkin. Now, let's take a step back for a minute. At no point during the questlines of searching for Oleg's missing daughter and the quest we're doing for the machinist Afra we know was there any crossover whatsoever. But with Mikael calling us from the broadcast tower, the mysterious nature of Project Horoscope, and finding Oleg's corrupted missing daughter also named Afra, things are becoming a lot more complicated than I initially thought. And the quest dialogue confirms this for us, encouraging us to seek out the truth by confronting Speaker Sunil, the only real lead we have for Project Horoscope since he's the one who redacted the files we found. So, with that in mind, we return to Pheropolis, but we notice something a bit weird. For whatever reason, this time the Clockwork King has manifested a giant teapot floating in the sky. Right. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Anyway, when we head to the Machinarium to find Speaker Sunil, we mention the giant teapot, but he just feigns ignorance and tells us to quit bothering him. That is, until we mention the missing records. After telling him everything we've learned so far about Oleg's missing daughter Afra, he eventually begins to speak about Project Horoscope, but using hypotheticals and describing it in a fictional setting, presumably to not gather the attention of the Clockwork King. Apparently, when the Machinist Guild tried to give the king the power to rewrite humanity, the king ordered a test. It gathered 6 people who embodied a variety of characteristics and temperament. Then, the king would multiply this person 6 times with variations in each iteration. For all the test subjects and their clones, their memories were wiped of the incident. And it turns out, the final version of Afra that was created is the one we know today, the model example of what the king considers the perfect citizen, Branch 5, as we saw in the records. Sunil has little else to say, and when we posit that it's the king's fault that this has happened, he just shifts blame to some unknown cause, suggesting there is something or someone causing the king to malfunction. Obviously just falling back to the classic excuse of the deadly saboteur. But with this knowledge, we can finally give Oleg some form of closure, however painful it may be. We can return to his home and tell him of Project Horoscope and the fate of his daughter, corrupted beyond repair. He offers us some form of thanks and has little to say, but we have many questions we can ask him, such as, doesn't he want to see his daughter? What about the other versions of Afra? And shouldn't he want to stop this from happening? As one of the royal guard himself, he has some power and sway within the city to seek justice. But in each line of questioning, all we get is anger and frustration and dismissal from Oleg. The corrupt Afra is a shell of his former daughter. The new Afras are something totally different, a version of his daughter fundamentally changed in some way. And when we ask for him to take action, he just responds in anger, casting the fault at those he seeks to protect the kingdom from. Saboteurs, miscreants, and those who break the law. Without them, the king would never have needed to try and create perfect citizens in the first place. Whatever we say to Oleg, he's made up his mind. He'll allow himself to wither away, drowning in excuses to mask the fear and pain that would require significant courage to face. Because it's so much easier to drink and believe the lie. For me, however, there's still much unfinished business here that I intend to face. Heading down to the market in Ferropolis, we can find a door built into a wall that I never noticed before, and inside we can find the person we're looking for, Reza. If we ask them about the 7th letter as Mikhail mentioned, they drop their disguise and begin to speak to us plainly. They notice our cranial moderator and conclude that we're the person helping Afra, but they offer us some additional information that was never mentioned to us before. The cranial moderator we have installed doesn't just help us understand sixfold cipher, it warps our thinking. As Reza says, it smooths out any irrational notions, making us think like a machinist. And to complicate things even further, we learn that Reza is the very saboteur that we've heard spoken about as the boogeyman seeking to destroy the stability of the kingdom. It's becoming increasingly clear that we have been woefully unaware of how deep the conspiracies we're tied up in go. First, we're conspiring with Afra to fix the king, then we find out about her background as a clone formulated to embody the perfect citizen. And now the very saboteur we've been warned about is asking us to conspire against Afra and the king. Reza tells us that Afra truly does believe what she's doing is right, but is misguided. And they offer us a different solution, one that will finally put all of these injustices to rest, a spell that will shut down the Clockwork King permanently. When we ask why they would want this, they give the same explanations I've observed so far. The people of the Clockwork Kingdom are drowning themselves in excuses and lies to hide from the most fundamental truth of all, that the difficulties and pain of life must be faced head-on. And when you entrust your fate to a deity forged of your own arrogance and hubris, you reap what you sow. Even worse, now that the kingdom has become so reliant on the Clockwork King to provide for them, if we shut him down now, the kingdom will become destabilized as they have to readjust, and many will die, something that Reza openly admits. But the question for us to consider is whether the people deserve their freedom, with all of its consequences, or should they continue to suffer quietly, sinking deeper into delusions as their loved ones vanish, the truth gets buried deeper and deeper, and the threat of corruption remains at their doorstep. With this looming in our mind, we can return to the Clockwork King, now with our cranial moderator installed, and we can finally learn of the sacramental duty that the king has thrust upon us. The sacramental duty is to make tea. Yeah, you heard that right. The king explains, the ceremony of having tea foretells happiness, calm, comfort, comedy, and the proper observance of duties. Apparently, the king has weighed the desire of the people and determined this is what they want: happiness, calm, comfort. And the best way he's found to do that is by making tea. Yeah, great logic there. When we ask why the king has tried to pull us away from our previous goal of pursuing Vela, which it does agree is an important concern, it tells us that it already sent someone out to deal with it apparently. Well, regardless of what the king wants, our fate and the fate of the kingdom is ultimately in our hands. We can choose to take down the king and free the people from their self-imposed enslavement to lies and injustice, while damning many to die, or keep the delusion alive and hope that somehow, in time, the king can be refined and rewritten to become the perfect, benevolent deity the people have always imagined he is. With whatever decision we make, our time in the Clockwork Kingdom is almost over, but we still have our final goal: to find Caxton Frost. In the midst of our exploration of the Clockwork Kingdom, we can find a small home sitting on a cliff at the edge of the region, hidden behind the mountains. Samuel and Horace Metcalfe, the man who we've heard is a great author of bottled vision. Apparently, Horace Metcalfe gained his popularity due to his adventurous tales of swashbuckling action from his dreams. After charming him to elaborate, he explains that not only does he have dreams of these tales, he's plagued by them, repeating them over and over in his dreams every night. He goes into detail, describing the fantastical scenes, until he mentions the most important detail: a woman holding the seed of the future in one hand and a sword that ends the world in the other. The Ashen Woman, he calls her. But of course, we know of her as Vela. When we mention this to him, he seems taken aback. And when we tell him we think he's Caxton Frost, he's adamant that he's not and dismisses it all as a silly misunderstanding or coincidence. But after trying to push him to drop the act, it becomes increasingly clear that he truly believes he is Horace Metcalfe, not Caxton Frost. Eventually, we hit a dead end in the conversation. Horace mentioned a private collection of his bottled visions that contain the most bizarre and detailed dreams he's recorded. So, we head back to his private collection behind a locked door and partake in the vision. We see mixed images of Vela and the Clockwork King, all a jumbled mess of dreamlike explanations that don't make much sense. But when we come out of the vision, we're hit with a certain clarity. From what we saw of him flying over the corrupted lands with Vela, there lies a city buried deep in the southeastern tip of the region that has been abandoned ages ago. The lost city of Progress. With that lead, we can head back into the corrupted lands, past cliffs and mountains, hiding a path of bridges with homes spinning around them without any explanation. As we fight our way along, we make it to the end with a large bridge leading us to the City of Progress, attached to the edge of the cliff hanging above the open skies below. The City of Progress is a large, complicated series of interconnected pathways and locked doors leading us back to previous areas. As we make our way through it, fighting off the corrupted creatures still wandering around the ruins of the city, acquiring coded keys to unlock new doors previously inaccessible, and finding various notes and flyers hinting at the civilization that once resided here, we finally make our way to the end. In the final room, in a sectioned off part of the city, we can find corpses spread across the floor, and a final diary entry from a junior comatologist of the Guild of Machinists, and acting royal factor at the time of writing the diary. The man, Gavel King Pwyll, writes of the fate of those who perished within the city and what happened here. The City of Progress was quarantined off, preventing any from entering or leaving as the corruption spread from within. He notes a man named Zeneb Weir, negotiating with him through the locked fence on behalf of the citizens. Weir tries to convince him that the people remaining have quarantined themselves from the rest of the corruption, but Pwyll notes his knowledge that their methods were insufficient, and he was afraid to share that information with them as it was prohibited by the king, and he feared the punishment if he ever managed to escape the city. Yet another example of the tyranny of the Clockwork King. He then notes that 2 months in, the people have progressively migrated across the city, avoiding the corruption bit by bit, and have since tried breaking into the compound where he and the other machinists remained, awaiting rescue from the king. But, as the next entry notes, Pwyll learns that the king finally made the decision not to send a rescue team, but orders them to stay put and prevent anyone from escaping. As the people of the city finally broke down the gates and made their way into the compound, Muir convinced Pwyll not to take his own life, but instead help them refortify the compound and hold out together. After 35 days, the corruption finally broke past the gates, forcing them to abandon their food and head into the gunnery tower above. The diary ends with Pwyll suggesting changes for the future and how this disaster can be better mitigated, before heading downstairs to help fight off the corruption with those who remain. But of course, we know his hopes will never see the light of day. After exploring every inch of the city, we can finally find a music box cylinder hidden away in a chest, something Horace may be familiar with. After learning the horrible fate of Progress and finding the music box, we return to Horace Metcalfe and place it in the player nearby. As the haunting tune begins to play, we hear a teacup crash to the floor as Horace stands up, caught in a trance. As we try to get his attention, he suddenly snaps back into consciousness. Finally, Caxton Frost regains control and responds to us with fury, cursing us for blowing his cover. He tells us that he cast a spell on himself to forget his memories and form the new identity of Horace Metcalfe, to live in peace with his lover, Samuel, from the prying eyes of the Clockwork King and his past with the Darkstar mercenaries. When we tell him of Vela's plan and ask for his help, he explains he was never one of her mercenaries, but rather a spy of the Clockwork Kingdom, the very person the Clockwork King mentioned that he sent to the Underlands. But, as Frost tells us, the news from the kingdom grew increasingly grim while in Vela's service, and he eventually found himself aligning with her and her plans instead. Then, as the mutiny took place, he found himself struggling, fighting with Vela against his own allies. And to make matters worse, he received word from the king to steal the map from Vela, forcing him to make an even harder decision: to betray those closest to him that he already betrayed his own former allies for, or to betray his homeland, his own king. The weight was too much to bear, and so he chose cowardice, to run and hide behind a false identity with his memories locked away where no one should have been able to find them. Returning to his anger and frustration, he lashes out again, blaming us for ruining his life and telling us to go away. But after literally telling him to shut the fuck up and stop hiding in his cowardice, he becomes stunned at our response. We call him out, showcasing our efforts to try and fix the Clockwork Kingdom, of which we have no allegiance, and is quickly falling to chaotic ruin, while he sits idly by in his home, sipping tea and busying himself with dreams of his past. After some tough love, Frost finally acknowledges his useless cowardice and offers to help, on condition that his concerns for him and his lover are dealt with, apostatic union pardons, and payment for his services. Yeah, we totally have the power to promise that. So with that half-hearted promise, Caxton Frost heads off to the Blinding Light, the final ally we need to finally confront Vela Kalos. We can now return to the Blinding Light, where we can converse with our new allies and learn more about their past and connections with Vela. Before we speak to the High Confessor and begin the next phase of our plan, it's worth taking a small detour to see what we can learn about Vela's motivations and past. And the spectral woman we've spoken to throughout the game could give us the insight we're looking for. She asks us to meet her at various important landmarks of Vela's past while visiting the different regions of the Oneric Isles. The first location we visit is in Hallowshire, the burnt ruin of Vela's childhood home. The ghost tells us of Vela's happy childhood with her sister Isabet, before an accident caused their home to burn to the ground, and her sister and mother with it. The tragedy rocked her to her core, causing Vela to flee the Union Navy and form the Darkstar mercenaries, scouring through every piece of information she could to try and find a way to bring her sister back. But even with all the myriad of strange magics and abominations of life and death we see across the Sky Realms, Vela could never find a way to bring her sister's ashes to life. As an Endless, she would be a ghost, caught in an endless torment. But without a body, it wouldn't even be possible. But maybe the power of a god could help. As it turns out, Vela managed to capture such a god, the creature we saw all the way at the beginning of the game. Atop the blinding light within the locked building lies the nameless god who reigns over death itself. If we die at any point on our journey, we return to this god, granting us another life, but at a cost. It asks us to kill Vela, finally freeing it from its void steel shackles. This entity serves as a very clever, potent explanation for our ability to respawn at will, and the various totems we see around the Isles, built in the image of this nameless god, function as our respawn locations for that same reason. This is an aspect of Dread Delusion that I love. The game's clever writing ties this entity in with both mechanics and narrative themes of the game in a truly impactful way. Vela's shackling of the god of death isn't just a physical act, it's the embodiment of her willful defiance against death itself. This isn't mere necromancy or grief-fueled desperation. It's an attempt to dominate death itself, to render it powerless under her hand, driven by a disturbing, unthinkable arrogance. But thankfully, Vela's plan to wield the power of the god of death bore no fruit, leading her to the Underlands and the Cradle. Returning to the Ghost's quest, in the Endless Realm, we can find the original location where the Darkstar mercenaries were formed, a small cave atop a mountain out in the wilderness of the region. The spectral woman tells us of her first encounter with the Darkstars when she was still living. She was a Wiccan hiding out and awoke to the Darkstar mercenaries seeking to capture her to be executed according to the goals of their employer. But with Vela holding a dagger at her throat, rather than take her life, she offered her a role in her band of mercenaries, with no explanation. She tells us of the intoxicating charisma that Vela exuded, drawing everyone around her in. She describes her time with the mercenaries as the first time she ever felt she properly belonged. But as time went on, the mercenaries grew and Vela became less and less selective with the contracts she took to support the growing band. In one case, Vela was contracted to kill the god, Cernan, throwing the ghostly woman into a rage for betraying her Wiccan ties and beliefs. But she cuts the story short, mentioning the Emberian key Vela discovered as the flipping point in the Dark Star's troubled history. In the Clockwork Kingdom, we can find an old, destroyed airship on an island on the edges of the region. The spectral woman tells us this is the Black Goblin, a fearsome pirate ship that terrorized the skies, until the Dark Stars were contracted to defeat them for a significant sum. And then came the Blinding Light, the new base Vela decided to capture, with plans to make them an unstoppable force. But around this same time is when Vela learned of the Cradle, and the mutinies subsequently followed. With those who had decided to mutiny against her, led by Orlaith, they took to the Black Goblin they had defeated and captured, seeking to fight back against Vela and her followers. But with her control of the Blinding Light, the airship never stood a chance. The spectral woman describes the moments aboard the ship. Vela and Orlaith clashing swords, once like sisters, now mortal enemies. She recalls Orlaith being thrown over the edge of the ship to the unknown surface below, before the ship's sudden crash and waking up to Vela standing over her, but simply walks away. It was at that moment she describes becoming the spectral echo of herself that we speak to now, splitting off from her physical body. Her physical form retained her own thoughts and will from the form we speak to now, and all she could do is watch as Inquisition agents carried her body away. She tells us, "I watched as they threw her in a cell, and their instruments of agony tore into her flesh. I watched as her will broke, and she spilled every secret she knew. I watched as they destroyed her." The woman she's describing, her original physical body, split from her current spectral form, is the High Confessor, the wretched, suffering husk that remains trapped within the spiked coffin under the influence and control of the Apostatic Union, the very person guiding us to seek out and destroy her former ally, Vela Kalos. The parallels we can see between the spectral woman and High Confessor with the Queen of Silver and the Entombed One are stark. And assuming a desire for revenge, we ask her what it is that she wants, and she tells us, for it all to just end, to see Vela's smiling face once again. With this new knowledge of Vela's past and the High Confessor's role in this grand narrative we seek to resolve, our meeting with her to continue our quest has a whole new weight to it. Speaking to her, she tells us of the plan, to head down to the Underlands with our new allies and chase down Vela to stop her. But first, we're gonna need an airship. And what better choice than the Blinding Light itself? Fuck yeah, dude. If seeing this massive fortress take to the sky in real time doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. But unfortunately, we can't take the entire fortress down to the Underlands. It's too large, and the storms that rage above the Underlands would tear the ship to pieces. Instead, we're going to take the small cutter airship docked below, currently being repaired and reinforced by Caxton Frost. With our new plan established, we're ready to head off to the Underlands, praying our ship is going to make it without being torn apart by the harsh storms that await us. So, we find ourselves crashed down in the Underlands, the hellish red lands and the sky completely engulfing our senses. But luckily, our allies are close by, ready to regroup and continue on our journey. The first fun little tidbit we learn about our journey here is, we're dying, apparently. There's a miasma that fills the air of the Underlands, and we have no protection from it as the rest of the gear burned up in the crash. Funny how all the rest of our new allies have their own protection and problem covered, but we don't. Great. Basalt tells us that various crashed ships from over the years may have some protection stored within that we can seek out, so we head out into the Underlands searching for something to keep us from keeling over. During this time, we can speak to all of our allies at various points, getting more of their personality as we work together to find our way through the complicated, interconnected Underlands. The surrounding area is filled with massive ruins with cipher magic technology unlike anything we found in the sky realms above. But with an ancient city of untold magical technology comes new types of enemies unlike anything we've seen so far. Tall, biomechanical creatures wander around the Underlands, stalking anything that dares to trespass with no real explanation of their desires or reason. These enemies of various shapes and sizes, some with simple swords and shields, others towering over us with chainsaw-like blades, and some more bizarre enemies that take on a spectral form, all pose a threat even on the standard difficulty due to their sheer numbers. Luckily, Orlaith tags alongside us, helping us fight off the dozens of enemies we encounter on our way through. We can find some of the old technology of the Emberians. Most importantly are the auto-coaches, the giant train-like machines that float with cipher magic across great distances, connecting major sections of the massive city below. After searching around the nearby areas around the auto-coach platform towering above, we can find the auto-coach key that will take us deeper into the city, towards Vela and the Cradle. Arriving at the station further in, the Duchess sets up a transpositional tent containing all the various workstations, beds, and a teleportation mirror, allowing us access to anything we need before venturing further. After some rest and upgrades, we head deeper into the city, walking across massive tunnel-like bridges connecting various sections, all filled with enemies to block our path. We head towards the tower in the distance, standing high above everything around us. Inside, we come to an auditorium with a platform seated in the center. Interacting with it opens a hologram of ancient Emberian technology. The artificial intelligence begins speaking to us, unaware of the fate of its creators. Explaining what has happened, the intelligence, shocked and horrified, comes to the realization that the Cradle is likely the cause of the destruction of the Emberians. That those who warned against it were right, that it would only cause death and destruction. When we ask about the Cradle further, the intelligence tells us that it's a half-ship, half-laboratory, said to hold an entity of staggering power. What it is, the AI isn't sure, as clearance was heavily classified and protected. We can ask more details about the intelligence itself and the city, Albertus. It tells us that it was meant to hold theatrical performances, and the city was the third largest in the Emberian Empire, which gives us an even greater sense of scale to the incredible size of the Emberian sprawl across the planet. But with little information left to gather here, we set out through the remainder of the city, fighting through the streets of Emberian slums, through various towers and large pathways, until we finally make our way to the last autocoach that will take us to the Cradle. Early on, when we first arrive here, we can see the looming dome-like structure of the Cradle and its myriad of extending pipes, guns, and main body extending outward below. But the sense of scale of the thing is really lost on you until this moment, as the autocoach slowly cuts through the air, bringing the Cradle closer, the sheer size of it quickly coming into focus. When we finally land with our allies at the entrance, we group together with Orlaith, ready to confront Vela within. And as we enter, this is what we see. Vela stands atop the platform before us, the massive, eldritch entity towering above us with her Darkstar mercenaries surrounding the area below. After hours of searching and planning and recruiting allies, we can finally confront her. After a moment, she recognizes us from the last time we met, at the Blinding Light, and she remarks at the journey we've been on, noting she almost doesn't recognize us after all we've seen. She quickly concludes that we must have had help from Orlaith and her former allies, including Caer, the High Confessor's true name, before her capture and torment into submission. After assessing the situation, she asks us our purpose here, and we're given some choices how to answer: to declare our intent to stop her, join her, or simply free ourselves from the Union's grasp, indifferent to the means. She laughs at us, speaking about her plans in grandiose, ideological terms, describing the entity behind her as the key to our salvation, that it will mend our broken world and abolish the evils of humanity, and all that's left is to awaken it. When we ask what the entity even is, she describes it. It is not a god, as the gods we know are bound by the rules of the world we inhabit, but she describes this entity as something from the void, the non-place of pure creation where time and space act in mysterious ways. The Emberians called it the Angel, This being from the void, she explains, is not bound to the rules of the cipher magic that binds our reality together, which gives it the power to bypass or even rewrite the rules of our reality entirely. She tells us the Emberians created the Cradle as an incubator for the Angel, explaining if they had awoken it, it would have enslaved humanity for all eternity. But instead, the lesser evil occurred, the whirlwind that destroyed the entire surface of the planet and everything on it. Acknowledging this immense and horrifying power, Vela, drenched in her terrible delusions, announces she will learn from the Emberians' mistakes and use the Angel to rid the world of its injustices and evils, and free humanity from death. When we question her, she tells us of the things that she's seen, the wonders of humanity and its kindness, nuns caring for their enemies, a man who gave his life to save a complete stranger, and an orphan, face speckled with blood, giving away her own last piece of bread. But she recounts equal horrors across the Sky Realms. The Union and its horrible oppression, the Wiccans and their gods' cruel blood contracts. Everywhere, she sees the weak slave away in mud while the rich grow richer. She talks of her plans to make all people equal, to change the very nature of reality and humanity itself so that everyone lives equally in her new heaven. No bloodshed, no inequality, and no death. In these interactions with Vela, we have a variety of dialogue choices to respond to her with, but no matter what, nothing stirs her, until we mention her sister, Isabet. She spits with anger at us, but quickly weakens, feeling the sense of anguish and despair wash over her as she talks about the injustice of her sister's death. At this moment of weakness, we can try to charm Vela and pull her away from her convictions, but in my case, I fail. And Vela turns to her crew, demanding them to awaken the Angel. With the Angel awakened, Vela concludes our conversation together, declaring this is the last time we will see each other, before... we awaken, once again in the grasp of the God of Death. He commends our effort and reminds us of our deal, that he will continue to help us escape death as long as we continue our efforts to kill Vela and free him. So, with our plot armor in full effect, and back aboard the Blinding Light, we can head up to speak to the High Confessor about our next steps. We find her in a radio conversation with her superiors, dismissing her request to confront Vela given their complicated history together. Spinning with anger as the person on the other side of the line ends the call, High Confessor Caer curses the man, blaming him for not being the proper father that Vela needed in her most difficult time, Admiral Kalos. She quickly changes subject and tells us the situation. The Apostatic Union wishes to seize the Cradle for themselves and institute their rule over the Sky Realms without resistance. She confides in us her frustrated allegiance with the Union has only been to avoid a jail cell, just like us. And so, we have a plan to try and stop them. She tells us that the Cradle has risen up to the Sky Realms and formed a defensive shield that has caught the full attention of the Union Navy. Our goal then is to pilot the cutter Airship and slip through the Cradle's defenses and head in to stop Vela before it's too late. Unsure how we're supposed to get past the Cradle's shield when even the Union can't, the Confessor tells us of Caxton Frost's plan. There's an ancient Emberian skycraft said to be able to break any barrier and avoid any pursuit, but was apparently lost during the whirlwind, never to be seen again. But there have been rumors of an island floating across the Sky Realms carrying a massive Emberian wreckage that may give some answers. When we ask how we're supposed to approach the island, the Confessor tells us the best news I think we've heard our entire playthrough. We get our own airship. Hell yeah. With the High Confessor giving us the very coveted permission to purchase an airship, we can head to any town in the Oneric Isles with an airship dock and purchase it there. This opens up a whole wide world of new exploration and intrigue for us. This final section of the game allows us to explore entire new, unvisited islands, complete various side quests, and discover all kinds of awesome, intriguing secrets across the Oneric Isles. From the giant mollusk that we've seen floating in the sky since the beginning, to the massive machine built during the God War, to the island holding the next step in our main quest, there is so much content to explore. Unfortunately, there's only so much time in this video to talk about everything, but I'll give you some highlights to encourage you to try it out and explore for yourself. There's an entire house system where you can purchase and upgrade houses in each region across the game, with their own unique look, and some containing their own interesting side quests. There's various visual airship upgrades you can mix and match to purchase and discover. There's a ton of highly unique and powerful hidden weapons, materials, artifacts, spells, and gear to be uncovered. The rare materials that you can find are used to upgrade your existing weapons and craft them into special, unique versions, such as turning your sword into an Emberian gun, or your normal bow into a stealthy, void-imbued bow. And what I think is my favorite aspect of the new open world for us is entering the giant mollusk and discovering the massive, open region hidden inside it, fit with winding caves of rare ores and a castle on the surface, filled with a coven of Wiccans dedicated to the worship of the mollusk that they live within. There is so much awesome and interesting content to explore, and not just in what the airship gives you, but throughout the entire game that I just didn't have the chance to cover. So once again, I highly encourage you to try out Dread Delusion for yourself, and have fun discovering all the game's secrets and intrigue. Now, returning to our main quest, with our airship acquired, we can seek out the mythical Emberian ship that we learned of before, the Rasmussen Sphere. Approaching the massive desert island we can find floating around the Oneric Isles, we can park our airship just outside the ancient shield defenses protecting it from airships, and walk through into the contained area within. In the center of the island is a towering ship crashed into the nearby mountainous area. As we fight our way across the landscape, fighting off bizarre alien creatures that we've never seen before, finding keys and flipping switches, we can find our way into a small cave hidden behind wreckage beneath the ship's massive hull above. Inside, we find a lone man, ragged-looking, expressing relief and pleasure as he tells us we're the first person he's seen in 30 years. Unsure if we're even real, he tells us that his name is Rasmussen, and as we notice his ancient Emberian rags, once a resplendent set of robes, it becomes clear that this is the man we're searching for. He explains that he and his family, the Rasmussens, have lived here since they crashed centuries ago. They've been protecting their creation for centuries, and this man is the sole living remnant of his clan. When their ship crashed here, they used the Rasmussen Sphere and inverted its power to create defenses around the island for protection. Unsure of why he's even held on for this long, the last Rasmussen tells us what we need to know: how to reach the sphere in the ship above and take it for our own purposes. Working our way in, fighting off enemies and capturing the sphere inside, we have what we need to bypass the Cradle's defenses. But before we leave, I think we ought to help this last Rasmussen get off this godforsaken desert island. When we offer to free him, he resigns himself to his life here and just remarks at his happiness that someone could finally take the sphere and use it for what it was meant for, and that he could finally survive long enough to meet someone to share kind words with. This character, while a minor one, is one of the very few in the entire game that I felt a deep sense of respect and connection with. His struggles are real, concrete, and he suffers no delusions or false beliefs about his fate. He has no ulterior motives or bias to decipher. He's just a man who has resigned himself to his purpose and does so with appreciation for the little solace and joy that we can offer him after tending to his duty alone for so long. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to stop this world from falling into ruin and suffering, at the very least for the sake of men like Rasmussen. But there's just one more thing we have to do. The High Confessor has told us of a godlet that she has watched over, that has been captured by the Apostatic Union. She gives us a void scalpel and asks us to end its life, freeing herself from the hostage situation that's keeping her under the Union's thumb. Heading out to the small home nestled near Hallowshire, we encounter her ghostly counterpart, demanding that we stop. Cursing her physical form, she begs us, tears in her spectral eyes, to free the godlet rather than kill it, giving us yet another decisive choice to make. Inside the home, we find the small godlet, a green, snake-like creature held by void steel chains. Before we make our decision, Caer tells us about this creature. Danu, once a god of prophecy for a kingdom during the Middle Ages, but now, after the God War, is simply her friend. When we ask why the High Confessor would want her dead, the spectral Caer tells us that it's purely a test of loyalty, giving the Union reason to trust her to take her revenge on Vela. She explains that the metal coffin she resides in separates her from the cipher magic of the world, cutting her off from something that she's known all her life. like depriving her of oxygen. And whatever is left of her within the coffin is the furious, vengeful version of herself that has lost all connection to who she once was. With this information, we must choose to kill or spare the godlet and accept the consequences. I chose to spare the godlet, and upon returning to the blinding light, we find Inquisition agents taking the High Confessor away. She curses us as a traitor, but asks one last thing of us. Although she'll rot away in her Inquisition cell, she will forgive us as long as we crush Vela and enact her furious revenge. With the Confessor gone, we speak to the spectral Caer, who gives us the last bit of guidance. With the Rasmussen sphere aboard the cutter Airship, we can gather with our allies and board to finally pierce the shield of the Cradle. We can see all the Union ships and the massive Cradle itself waiting just outside the blinding light, giving a grandiose weight to the climax of our story. We approach the cutter Airship within the blinding light and set off to the Cradle. When we land, we find ourselves aboard the front of the massive ship, the giant glowing shield surrounding the skies all around. Our allies wait nearby, giving their final thoughts before we open the gates and begin our assault. The grandiosity of the ship before us, with the towering Cradle in the distance, along with the intense music that starts up in our final push to stop Vela, gives us an intense and exciting energy to the fight before us. We head down the ramp, fighting off mercenaries to find the Duchess casting cipher magic to block the tunnel at the entrance to the ship, temporarily holding off Vela's army. Nearby, Orlaith and Caxton Frost stand in front of another tunnel blocked by a large fan, and they ask for our help to head down to the nearby elevator across a lower open section of the ship to find a switch. As we head down, we fight off countless mercenaries and ancient Emberian mechanical monsters, and find our way to the switch. But when we head back up, we find Caxton in his mechanical armor, twisted, broken, and covered in blood. Telling us to continue on without him, we head deeper into the Cradle via the tunnel nearby. We fight our way through various tunnels and open rooms filled with more of Vela's soldiers, until we find ourselves in a large open room with a platform casting cipher energy at some creature floating in the center. Approaching it, this avatar of the angel begins to attack us, serving as a final challenge before we finally approach Vela at the end of the line. This boss has a lot of health that you have to slowly whittle down while avoiding its mid-range attack of blades that swing out in front of it. It can also cast a shield in front of itself for a short period, blocking any damage we send its way, and it can also cast a shield above its head to heal itself. Ranging only somewhat works if you move very fast, as it likes to close the distance constantly, so melee may be your best bet. With great defenses and healing, along with a massive health pool, the best option seems to be to go as full offensive as possible to take down as much health as you can as quickly as you can before it heals up again. After a while, you should be able to defeat the Angel's avatar and head into the auto coach in the final room of the Cradle ship, where Vela awaits. And we find Orlaith lying lifeless on the ground before Vela, with signs of intense battle between them. But the Vela before us is unlike before. She flexes her arm, its black flesh pulsing with eldritch energy, what she mentions as a simple byproduct of the work she's done here, and foreshadowing the inevitable result of her actions. Shocked, but furious, Vela declares having killed us, piercing our heart directly. The only way we could have survived is with the power of a god, something she realizes is true as she says it. With one final chance to convince Vela to stop her madness before it's too late, we can charm her one last time and convince her to look at the person she loves, lying dead before her on the floor. Passing the charm check of 75, Vela realizes what she has done. Finally, for the first moment since her sister's untimely death, Vela frees herself from her delusions. She begins to break down, realizing her excuses. I didn't want to. They made me do it. I had no choice. Anything to justify her actions, and anything to escape the pain that we see flash across her face as she sobs, wiping tears away with a mix of frustration and despair. She explains, maybe her sister died so that she could save everyone, and every harsh choice she made was a debt she took upon herself, growing greater and greater, but all to be repaid with the angel's power. But she admits, she's so deep in blood, she can't even see the surface anymore. Resigning herself to her fate, she finally steps aside and leaves the final decision to us. As we approach the angel, we have one final conversation with Caer. She explains that the angel, not being of this reality, cannot interface with it properly. It needs perspective, and so we must merge with it. She warns us with a speech that summarizes what we've seen of this dark and twisted world, home to dreamers and fantasists. She declares their delusions have seeped into the fabric of the earth, waiting for one to reclaim them. And she reminds us of our choice: to wield the angel's power and free everyone from the hell they've endured, to stop the naive delusions that would cause a young man to sacrifice himself to the cruelty of an unjust god to save his village from starvation, or the selfish delusions of a king, thinking he can free himself from death, but only curses himself to die while everyone under his rule suffers an eternal torment of undeath. Or the arrogant delusions of the machinists who constructed the Clockwork King, damning hundreds, if not thousands, to the transformation into chaotic, monstrous abominations of corruption, or become cast into another dimension, frozen in time to be forgotten by those that love them, or even to be forced to live under tyrannical rule and forget those you love lest you be punished for questioning the unchecked authority that is the very source of your suffering. Or the cruel, unwavering delusions of the apostatic union, once a force to free the people from their enslavement under the gods of the land, now a bureaucratic hammer crushing any resistance to their ideals with a psychopathic system of torture, confinement, enslavement, and damning the average person to the consequences of their newfound freedom from the old gods, with no replacement for what they offered, throwing the lands into famine and suffering. All the horrible and depressing things we've experienced across the Oneric Isles, we finally have the power to free the people from. We can be the arbiter of Vela's grand vision, to free the people of cruelty, injustice, delusion, and death, at risk of ending all of life itself. But maybe that would be better than suffering the existence we've observed in our time here. Or maybe this is the nature of life: the freedom to live and die, to try and reverse the results of poor choices and delusions that have cast the world into the various forms of hell of their own making. Maybe we can help, and hope that humanity can overcome its mistakes. Maybe despite all we've seen, we can work to create a new, better world, free of shortcuts and falsehoods. A world dedicated to truth and justice and fairness. A world that allows people to see and acknowledge the consequences of their mistakes and use what they've learned to reshape the world into something that's better, freer, and more just than anything the angel and its power could provide us by simply rewriting the rules. Maybe with the finite nature of life and death, with its suffering and pain and failure, we can grow and become so much more than anything that came before. Maybe that's the only way we can ever hope to achieve what matters most. Maybe we can learn to face the inescapable cruelties of life with strength, courage, and resolve in hopes that our lives will mean something, that even in death, our decisions and our actions might have made the world a better place, if even just for a moment. Or maybe that's all just a delusion. Thank you all so much for watching. Dread Delusion is an absolute pleasure, and there's so much content in the game I would have loved to cover and explore. I think it's very rare to find such an ambitious indie project like this one that actually managed to deliver on its goals. While certainly the game isn't perfect, I think what it lacks in certain areas, like deeply satisfying and complex game mechanics, it more than makes up for with aesthetics and narrative that are pretty hard to rival. I think the intense honesty of the themes of delusion, corruption, fear, hope, and so on were handled in Dread Delusion in a way that I've really never seen before. Turning the concept of dogmatic religiosity on its head with the tyrannical, anti-religious apostatic union is absolutely genius, and making the gods of force that is ever present in the world gives a sense of mystery and danger every time you dare to venture forth into unknown territory. There are many gods and interactions I couldn't cover, but each time they come up, there's always a fear of what their involvement can mean, and I think that adds so much to the experience. In total, I spent around 40 hours in my playthrough of Dread Delusion and completed all of the side content. And I would say, even putting the main story aside, the experience of adventure as you uncover some awesome secrets and fascinating side quests is alone enough to justify giving the game a try. I would highly encourage you, even if you watch through the full narrative of the game in this video, to give the game a try for yourself and experience it firsthand, as there was much that had to be shortened and simplified from the real experience of the game itself. I look forward to finding more games like this one, and I hope that Lovely Hellplays continues to release masterpieces like Dread Delusion. Once again, thank you to everyone for the continued support. My channel really feels like it's growing, and my passion for the projects is always at the forefront of my mind, so stay tuned for the next one.